News reads whisper, ancient scrolls unfold, prophets penned the story, truth written in gold. Man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, despised and rejected, no relief. Silent like a lamb, slaughtered for the guilt. Crimson rivers flow when the temples tilt. By his stripes we healed, wounds bore the cost. Pierced for transgressions, the lost and lost. Who believed the report? The arms stretched wide, roots in dry ground, no beauty to pride. Isaiah saw him, the servant who bled, took on the weight where the guilty tread. Proof in the pain, prophecy true. He died, he rose, now life's renewed. Laid on him the iniquity of us all, crushed for the sins, heard redemption's call. No deceit in his mouth, no violence in his hand. The innocent lamb, fulfilling God's plan. Grave with the wicked, rich in his death. The world turned dark at his final breath. Prolonged his days, he shall see his seed. Victory written where the scars would bleed.
How's it going, everybody? Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining another live. As I look in my camera and see a bag of pork rinds in the background, probably could have got rid of that before the stream started. Anyways, oh well, who cares? Keeping it pretty chill, keeping it pretty casual as usual. And so, just real quick, who is this stream for? Who can join? Pretty much anybody can join. This is just a question. If you have questions, if you have doubts about just Christianity being true, is the New Testament historical? Is it reliable? Can we trust it? Did Jesus really claim to be God? Is Paul like a real apostle, or is he just a liar? Was he deceived? Did the resurrection happen? Pretty much those kind of topics, New Testament types of topics. If you want to talk about messianic prophecy and stuff, or modern miracles, we can talk about all those things. Just basically think about what my channel is about and ask me questions about that. I don't really get into tons and tons of metaphysics and deep philosophy. It's mostly just history and the text itself. And so that's why I have buddies like Than or whoever that help me complement me in other areas in terms of the metaphysics and stuff. I punt to people like that. But if you guys want to ask questions about New Testament reliability, authorship of the Gospels, resurrection, all of that kind of stuff. Somebody says no OT. I'm going to have Jonathan McClatchy on, and we're going to talk about some Old Testament reliability arguments. We'll talk about maybe the Exodus and different things like that. We could talk about fulfilled prophecy that's just not messianic prophecy. He's going to be going through and doing a presentation in the near future on that. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, I'm willing to talk about like some stuff OT, but it's just not where I've spent like the majority of my time. It is something that I'm planning on learning more and doing more, maybe making more videos on. I can't talk about like some undesigned coincidences in the Old Testament and stuff like that, but it's not something that I've spent as much time on as I'd like yet, but I will in the future. And so if you have like some questions like, why did God do this in the Old Testament? I can sort of answer, but again, that's not necessarily my expertise either, although I think those questions are important. So the thing with apologists that I think people have to kind of keep in mind, not everybody's going to be like a jack of all trades. Okay. Not everybody is going to like know the answer to every single thing, have everything, philosophy, existence of God, arguments against the existence of God. They know everything about New Testament reliability, Old Testament reliability, and everything else like that. There are some people that are crazy like that, but it's a process, and everybody goes through a process of learning more and more. And I've just spent tons of time focusing on New Testament kind of stuff because that's just what I'm mostly interested in. So anyways, you can also ask questions in the chat. We don't have anybody in queue to join the stream yet. So feel free to ask your questions in the chat. That's totally fine. I'm here to answer your questions. Just to kind of let you guys know, I am going to be working on some other projects and videos. I'm sorry for a little bit of the slowdown. I've been dealing with a few, like, I guess you could say symptoms of some things. And so I haven't been able to as much. I've also been kind of busy with just some other like side projects. I did a public speaking event at Ratio Christi here at one of the local chapters in my state. And so I've just been a little bit busy, not trying to make a bunch of excuses, but definitely am planning on having more content coming your way. Um, the Alex O'Connor debate with Trent Horn, I know that's happened like 2 or 3 weeks ago. That definitely gave me a few things to think about. And so I am working on a video regarding, I just did that video on the persecution of the apostles, and how Christians should make the persecution argument for the sincerity of the witnesses regarding the resurrection. But I'm also going to be, Alex really likes the Mormon parodies and eyewitness testimony and different things like that. So I am working on a video with that. And let me just say, once you see the differences between Mormonism and the witnesses there and the witnesses with the resurrection, it's just not a good parody, not a good parody at all. Speaking of Than, I mentioned you earlier. Eric is so cute. I am feeling very cute today. Feeling very cute. This is exactly what you would expect Than to say, because as Libiano exposed, Than is big gay. What is the Dawa scene even up to anymore? What is the Dawa scene even up to before? Allah is God. Allah is Arabic for God. But if you say that Islam is true, you're free to join the stream, buddy. Feel free to join the stream. Let's see. Let's look at some of the questions. Not sure if this is NT related, but what happened to the people who died before Jesus was resurrected or before Jesus came at all? Michael Heiser has some interesting opinions there. It does say things in like First Peter chapter 3 about Jesus visiting the spirits in prison. I think we could just say we don't know. We don't really know for sure. I think it's going to be speculative, whatever we say. So it's when it comes to speculative stuff that's low stakes, I just tend to not worry about it too much. I don't think about it too much, but one day we'll know, and we'll be like, whoa, that's cool. I don't know. I have a question from my morning reading of Mark, but I'm not sure that it pertains to the prior topics. Hey, man, fire away in the chat if you want to. Testify, why do you think people have different understanding of the scripture in the church? Depends on what you mean by different understanding of scripture in the church. If you're talking about like why there's so many denominational differences, one of the things that I've said this before and I've said it again, one of my favorite channels is Ready to Harvest. I don't know if you guys seen Ready to Harvest, Joshua. That guy's channel is awesome. I love that guy's channel because he just talks about all the different denominational differences, even some obscure denominations like you've never even heard of, right? And while it is true that like there are some important differences, I think, between Protestants and Orthodox Christians and Roman Catholics regarding church hierarchy and especially the doctrine of justification, there's so much that we agree on. And even then, like no Christian thinks that they can just save themselves by their good works, right? And so we all agree that Jesus is God incarnate, that he's the third person of the Trinity. We all tend to agree that the Bible is the inspired, inerrant word of God. We all tend to agree that Jesus resurrected from the dead, died for our sins, and that the only way to salvation is through him. So we all tend to agree on a lot. Now, there are definitely some important differences, like I said, especially regarding justification and different things like that. And so to me, that's not the main focus of my channel necessarily, although I may get more into my personal, I guess, I don't want to say denominational beliefs, but my own personal kind of beliefs in the future and different things like that, because I do want people to know that they can have assurance of salvation. And I do think that's where Rome and the East tend to leave people in a place where they don't have that assurance. And I don't think as like a pastoral concern that that's a good thing, especially when the scripture says in First John that we can know that we have eternal life. Okay. And so, but overall, like there's so many things we agree on, Jesus is coming back. There's so many fundamental things that we agree on. And I think it's because the scriptures are clear enough when it comes to matters of salvation. And so, it doesn't really trouble me. If anything, I get encouraged. And I even asked this to Joshua, the guy who I was talking about. Forgive me if I'm rambling a little bit. But I was like, hey, because he's Baptist. He's very neutral. But it did come out that he was Baptist. And I was like, did the differences like discourage you regarding the truth of Christianity? And he was like, his response, if I remember correctly, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, is no, it's the opposite. If anything, all the similarities that we share in common, I find to be encouraging. Okay. So I don't find that to be different. And also, when people say there's like 44,000 denominations or different things like that, that's just not even true. A lot of those denominations that they're counting have to do with like sometimes denominations are just at a local level that have nothing to do with doctrine whatsoever. And so when people vastly overstate the amount of denominations that they are, just be careful. There's really not as many as people make it out to be. There's too many. There's no doubt about it. But it's watch out for people when they overstate that. So, anyways, you were talking about me early. What were you saying? I was saying, please don't come to me with your questions about metaphysics, because I am not like get into the deep philosophy of the metaphysics of the Trinity and incarnation as much as I would like to. And I said that I leave that to other apologists. I like the history stuff, and I'll talk about the text. Um, but as far as that other stuff, it's not necessarily my expertise. Unless you want to come up and join me, Than. I said just I leave that to people that I know, friends like Than. So yeah. Anyways, I will get there. I will get there. I will get there. Let's see. I am going to punt, Jacob. I'm sorry about this question. How do you think you could walk us through how to refute the JW's 144,000 interpretation on Revelation? I am going to make a video on that. And so, or, Lord willing, I'm making a video on that. And so I have a script all cooked up. And so just stay tuned. I don't want to spoil it too much, but let's just say it's funny how literal they take certain parts of the text when other times they're like, this is metaphorical. And so their hermeneutic is completely inconsistent. That's the biggest problem. I'll just leave it at that. So I may watch some shorts and just kind of react to those while we wait for calls. But again, anybody can come up, join link. You can be Christian, non-Christian, former Christian, Muslim, atheist, agnostic, Jew. I don't care. Come on up. So question, I hear non-Christians say scholars agree Matthew, Luke, copy Mark. My instinct reply is so, but do you have a reply for this? Thank you. God bless you. Yeah, that's a good question. Let me show you what my reply to this is basically, I think that the Gospels show marks of dependence, but I think they also show marks of partial independence. And there is nothing wrong with, say, Luke or Matthew, even if Matthew is a disciple, to say, you know what, this is a memoir of Peter. That's what all the early church basically said and believed, that Mark was basically Peter's interpreter or like a scribe or traveling companion, something to that effect. We could get into those references if you guys want to, but basically there is nothing wrong with taking a text that already is in existence and saying, you know what, I know more, I have more information, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel, but where I do have more information, I'm going to go ahead and insert more information, and that's totally fine. That's not weird. That's not like that strange of a thing. Like why reinvent the wheel unless you like really want to, like you're John or something, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to tell you guys a lot more details. But not every gospel is going to have to do that. And so now I think that we see evidence of this, because what a lot of skeptical New Testament scholars will say is like, well, anytime that there is copying, if there's variation, it's redaction, it's editing, and usually it's done for some sort of theological purpose. Okay. And so we look in in Mark chapter 6 and verse 14, and it says, when Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known, some said, I just my controller came unplugged there for a second, said when King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some said John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. But others said he is Elijah, so on and so forth. So in Mark's version of the story, Herod hears that Jesus' name had been known, and some had said, that this is who he is. Okay. But we don't see something that we do see in Matthew. Forgive me if my brain is a little bit slow this morning. I'm just catching up on some sleep here. So anyways, in Matthew chapter 14, it says, at that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus. So this is Matthew's version. And he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist, for he had been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him." Okay. So notice that Matthew has a little bit of a variation. And so a clever New Testament scholar, say a Dan McClellan or a Bart Ehrman or something, would probably just tell you, okay, Matthew was just copying Mark, and he decided to add, for whatever narrative purposes, this question about the servants, right? Like that he's just going to ask this question to them, okay? But it's kind of like, okay, what? Why is he asking this question to his servants? Like, what are they supposed to know exactly? And then how does Matthew know this, and all that other stuff? And so you can just say it's just redaction. It's just redaction, it's just added for storytelling purposes, maybe theological purposes even. But when we go to Luke's gospel, we actually see an answer why Herod would ask his servants, right? So we read about women accompanying Jesus, and it says soon afterward. Here, let me zoom in a little bit so you guys can see this better. Soon afterward, he went on through cities and villages, proclaiming and bringing good news of the kingdom of God. And 12 were with him, and some women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary Magdalene, whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Huzzah, Herod's household manager. Okay, and then it talks about Susanna, many others, provided them for out of their means. Okay, so this actually explains extremely well why Herod would ask his servants, right? And how like Matthew would know about this, right? And so like Matthew would know what question was asked to the servants because the disciples have connections to people working in Herod's own household, right? So this actually fits. This makes more sense on the hypothesis that this is actual history than this is just like redaction and people making stuff up. Because think about what's going on right here. This question has nothing to do. The previous story was all about what happened to John the Baptist, the fate of John the Baptist, all the bad things that are about to happen to him. He's in prison and they're about to cut his head off. Okay. This story has absolutely nothing to do with that whatsoever. And yet it dovetails in such a way that it just looks like this makes sense, right? And so, yeah, this is just one reason. I could give others. It looks like I do have a caller, so I'll bring him up. But it doesn't really matter. It's a big so what, because anybody can just have a text and go, you know what? I have more information to add, and I'm going to add that. Luke isn't getting this information from Mark, right? He adds this in, but yet Matthew and Luke, they dovetail, and there is some overlap with Matthew. So hope that makes sense. Already. We got Cole. What's up?
Can you hear me? Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I just had a question. I was talking to one of my skeptical buddies. I'm a Christian. And he was asking me about the cursing of the fig tree. I don't know if you've ever heard this, because I had never heard it before. But he was talking about in the account in Mark, how it seems strange how Jesus cursed the fig tree, likewise in Matthew, and like it withers. But then in Mark, like a few verses later, in verse 20, it says, as they passed by the next morning, they saw the fig tree was withered away to its roots. And they're like, oh my goodness, look, like you've cursed it and it is withered. And he was asking me, like, it seems super strange. It kind of seems like a contradiction. Yeah. They're like surprised that it's withered away.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally get that. That's a legitimate apparent contradiction. And sometimes I will say this with like contradictions. Okay. We have to be careful when it comes to like falling for the fallacy of objections. Right. And so what can happen is like, there's all these contradictions, and how are you going to answer them? Like anytime we're dealing with history, we have to look at the text like wholesale, right? And so we have to look at all the positive arguments for the reliability of the text, which there are many when it comes to the Gospels. And then we're going to have to realize that like in some cases, there might be contradictions that are apparent that we might just not know how to resolve at all, but that wouldn't like overturn the overarching like strong reliability of the text, right? And at best, we might just say like, okay, well, I might need to rethink my doctrine of inerrancy or something like that. This is one particular example that even like somebody like Lydia McGrew, who's not an inerrantist, will just say that this is probably more of like Matthew maybe getting part of the story, making some assumptions and just kind of like filling out as best as he could, but wasn't like trying to just like make stuff up. Okay. And so because that's just not what the authors are like in terms of the way that they're reporting their material overall. Okay.
Yeah.
Now people who would try to harmonize this, and I don't necessarily think that this is wrong. And so you're right to bring up that in Matthew 21:12-19, it says that in the morning, as he returned to the city, he became hungry, and seeing the fig tree by the wayside, he went to it and found nothing but only leaves. And he said, may no fruit ever come from you again. The fig tree withered at once. When the disciples saw it, they marveled. How did the fig tree wither at once? Jesus said, truly, I say to you, and talks about faith and all that other kind of stuff. And then Matthew's account, like it's a two-step thing. Like on the following day, when they came to Bethany, he was hungry, and seeing in the distance in the fig tree, he went to see if he could find anything on it. He came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season. And so he curses it. And then as they passed by in the morning, they saw the fig tree wither away at its roots. And so it's kind of like, what's going on here? So what a lot of people will say, and this is like what Craig Blomberg would say in his book on New Testament reliability and everything like that, is that Matthew's just compressing the order while Mark gives a more detailed sequence. And so Mark gives a fuller chronology. Jesus enters Jerusalem. He looks around the temple. He curses the fig tree on the way to Jerusalem. He cleanses the temple. The disciples notice that the fig tree's withered. So Matthew compresses the material and groups the temple cleansing and fig tree episode more tightly, where and he doesn't seem to be giving a strict chronology order at every point. So he's just narrating it in a not a chronological kind of way. And so Mark actually gives us the day-by-day sequence, while Matthew gives us a compressed account. And so Jesus cursed the fig tree before the temple cleansing, and then the withering was noticed afterwards. And so now you will notice, this is something that I noticed, like when you read Matthew and a lot of the miracle accounts and you compare them to Mark, he does kind of do that quite a bit. Like you see that with the raising of Jairus's daughter from the dead. You see that with the madman of Gadara. He really does compress a lot of the miracle accounts, and he tends to kind of focus more on the teaching, where Mark is giving us like 20 passages in a place where like, or 20 verses where like Matthew gives us like 8. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So, like I said, even if you like say, okay, like this can't be necessarily harmonized, like you still have people like McGrew. It's like these accounts are ridiculously historical. So
I like McGrew's account. I've read her book, or like a book and a half of hers. I gave a talk on undesigned coincidences and watched a bunch of your videos on it, so it was pretty cool.
Nice.
But would there be like some underlying reasons to take Matthew's account as to Mark's? Just like thinking off the fly, like would Matthew have been there versus like Mark getting secondhand information from Peter? Because like something that my buddy, like the moment I tell him that like, oh yeah, Mark is he's relying on Peter or whatever other source material he has, then he would be like, well, then I should trust Matthew's account if he was like a direct eyewitness.
Yeah, because Matthew's a disciple. But there's just because he's the disciple, he's one of the 12, doesn't mean like he's present in every single scene, you know? And so it doesn't really, we don't really know. It just says the disciples. It doesn't say like the 12 asked Jesus. And so he may have not been present, whereas Mark, he's getting his information directly from Peter. And so I don't know if it's like a matter of like, trust this one over the other, because again, now we're just getting into like speculation and stuff. So we just kind of have to look at like, what's the overarching narrative? What's the overarching theme of what happened? We don't know exactly the order, how it happened. It seems like Mark's account, like it does kind of, I don't know what the words that I'm looking for. It seems a little, there's more details, so that, I mean, that's kind of something that we could think about. I do think the timing, the chronology, we can actually map out by looking at other gospels. Let me show you something real quick for what I mean.
Is it the account with like John and Holy Week, or?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I remember reading it in Lydia's book, I'm pretty sure.
Awesome. Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. And so let me just go over it, if you don't mind, just for the audience.
Yeah, of course. I need to be refreshed anyway. So
yeah. So in Matthew keep saying the wrong name. in John chapter 12, in verse 1, it says that Jesus came to Bethany 6 days before Passover. And then in John 12:12, it says the next day, the large crowd had come to the feast, that had come to the feast, heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, right? And so in John, Jesus enters Jerusalem 5 days before Passover. So Mark, he actually gives no timestamp, but the sequence like perfectly fits John, right? And so in verses 1 through 11, there's the whole triumphal entry scene. Jesus enters the temple, he looks around, and then he returns to Bethany because it's late. So that fits a full day of activity after an early start. So counting from John's timestamp, day 5 before Passover, there's the triumphal entry. And then day 4 before the Passover, that is when we get the fig tree cursed, right? And then day 3 before the Passover, they notice that the fig tree was withered. And then there's like debate in the temple and all that other stuff. Jesus' authority is challenged and they're doing all this stuff. Jesus teaches, gives some parables, and goes all the way to the Olivet Discourse, right?
Yes.
So that's day 3. And then day 2 before Passover, Mark explicitly says, now it was 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, right? And so notice that John gives the explicit starting timestamp, but Mark doesn't. But when Mark's day-by-day sequence is actually counted out, it lands exactly where John's chronology predicts. And so it's kind of crazy because you're thinking like, okay, well, if John is like looking really close and copying Mark and then just being like, you know what, I'm just going to put this like it was 5 days before Passover. I'm going to do all this sleuthing, all this detective work by very carefully combing through Mark's gospel like we just did. But then I'm not going to give all these other details. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like it's an undesigned coincidence. And not only that, but there's even an apparent discrepancy in the account. So it's not by copying, because Mark 12, 1 through 8 places the anointing at Bethany 6 days before Passover, before the triumphal entry, where Mark 14, 1 through 3 appears to place the anointing 2 days before Passover. This is after the triumphal entry and all the temple controversies. And so what the contradiction apparently is that John seems to place the anointing earlier in Passion Week. Mark seems to place it later on Wednesday. So critics say that this is a contradiction. But I just think that Mark is narrating achronologically, and Mark 14:3 is connected by Mark 14, 1 through 2, which is connected. And so Mark may be saying, now while Jesus was in Bethany without attending a strict sequence, it just fits thematically. But if it's copying, like it's not smooth copying, you know, it creates an appearance of like discrepancy. And so I don't think John independently just knows the same date. And again, this is just best explained on eyewitness testimony. So does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking another question.
No, you're good.
What is like your resolution to the charge that John misplaces? Is it the crucifixion?
Yeah. I can run through that with you.
Because I've been talking to some people in IP's Discord. There's this one lady in there who's very intelligent, but man, it got super detailed super fast, and I kind of lost. We were going through a bunch of sources from just extra biblical sources of when this feast would have taken place in X, Y, and Z. And man, I lost it.
It gets a little confusing, and I totally get it. And so let me, let's see. Jesus is buried. Is this it? No. I have a note here. I should have a note. I'm gonna be really mad at myself if I don't, because I know I've talked about this one. Bear with me here. One thing about history is you got to have a lot of notes. And that's one thing I've been doing, is just spending a lot of time building notes in Logos.
Yeah, that looks like some pretty cool software.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. How do I not have this? This is like a really important one. Let me take a look here. No, that's not it. Unbelievable. Of all the things, I should have that one. Let me see. Let's see if I can just search it. Aha! Yeah, I do have it. Woo! All right. Bear with me with my Homer Simpson woohoo there. Yeah. This was. I have done a couple videos on this one in the past. I know Useful Charts like did a whole detailed video on this. And then I think I replied to Orthodox Muslim for some goofy reason.
Yeah,
But anyways,
the Dawa table at our university has been using it.
oh, has he?
Yeah.
Yeah. They probably they have the script, man. They always got their script.
I went and watched a Lydia video on it because Lydia was talking about even some of the scholarship. She was just mind blown at that they are just like, yeah, John, like, invents or like, is using literary devices, Michael Licona, X, Y, and Z, to make his theological significance. And she was like, this is absurd.
Yeah. She makes some really good points there because it doesn't even really like fit the theological significance like that much, like at all. So, but yeah, just answering the contradiction on a, like, besides just their goofy way that they say that John is creatively doing this to match theology, just answering it by itself. It says John 19:14. This is the contradiction, supposedly. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, behold your king. Okay, well, Mark says on the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lambs, where will you have us go to prepare to eat the Passover? And so the alleged contradiction is that the people say the synoptics have Jesus die on Passover, where John had Jesus die before Passover when the lambs were slaughtered. And the usual claim is that they did this for symbolism. Jesus dies as a Passover lamb, which they don't even get this. Like, they even talk about the hour of the day, and it's like, that's not even the hour of the day that the Passover lambs are even slaughtered, and all kinds of goofy stuff like that. But besides all that, John 19:14 says that it was the day of preparation of the Passover. That doesn't have to mean the day before Passover. Preparation can mean Friday, the day before the Sabbath. And that Mark actually uses the exact same kind of language. He says that it was the preparation day, that is the day before the Sabbath. So John himself explains it that's in the same way. In John 19:31, it says, since it was the day of preparation, and so that the bodies would not remain on the cross. This is after Jesus dies. Okay, and so like the bodies needed to be removed because it was preparation, and the next day was the Sabbath, right? And then John 19:42, it says, because it was the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was close to hand, they laid Jesus there. And so John completely agrees with Mark. Jesus died on the day before the Sabbath, Friday.
Yeah.
Right. So that doesn't work. Also, when John says that it was a high day in John 19:31, the point is probably that the Sabbath fell during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, making it especially solemn. Now, the pushback that critics give is in John 18:28. It says that the Jewish leaders wouldn't enter into Pilate's headquarters because they didn't want to be defiled, so that they could eat the Passover. And so the critics will say, well, this proves the Passover meal hadn't happened yet. But that actually creates a problem. If they were worried about the evening Seder, their defilement would expire at sundown after washing anyways. So it's like, that doesn't work. So entering Pilate's residence that morning would not prevent them from eating the Seder that night. Therefore, eat the Passover likely refers to a different Passover meal, not the initial Seder. And so the Passover was actually more than one meal. And so Passover could refer to the whole Feast of Unleavened Bread, not only the Seder. And we see in Numbers 28:18-23, it describes offerings on the first day of unleavened bread. This included a food offering in addition to the regular morning offering. So this actually supports the existence of a daytime festival meal, often tied to the Hagiga. Okay. You also have to keep in mind Josephus himself. He mentions the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which we call Passover. And he talks about like this is a whole period of time, right? This isn't just like limited to a day kind of thing. And so John 18:48 probably means that the leaders wanted to remain clean for festival meals during the Passover, likely the Hagiga, not the Seder that had actually occurred. And so that's kind of like the nutshell version of it. There's more to it. And I could get into more if you have any pushback there, but it's not the same meal. And John and Mark actually completely agree. And even the chronology match that I just showed you with the undesigned coincidence, they agree on the day. They agree on the chronology, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so they both agree it was on Friday.
Yeah, totally, 100%. Yeah, it's like this is just like it's a weird like I get where the objection comes from, but it just comes from not reading very close. Is what I would say. Also, not knowing the Jewish. This is what kind of boggled my mind when Useful Charts made this objection. Is he's I know he's not like a conservative Jewish believer, but he is Jewish. Nonetheless, he does celebrate this stuff. Like he should know better. So I thought it was weird that he like made a whole video about it. And but anyways, yeah. And so
what day does that fall on? The 14th of Nisan, or
I believe so. I'm just going off of memory. But yeah, and so yeah, it's just not the same thing, right? It's referring to festival meals during the wider period, not the initial Seder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sweet. You got time for one more question?
Yeah, man, you're the only one up at the moment, and these are great questions. So yeah, no, this is great.
It's kind of a shift though, but I've heard you talk about it. It kind of gets more into philosophy, but like, when are these arguments from silence proper? Because I know y'all always bash on these people for making arguments from silence. Is there a right way of going about it? And like, what is wrong in like the skeptical arguments from silence that people like Bart Ehrman make? Because it seems like I want to say that like I can like use reasoning and be like, if this was the case, then I would expect this. I don't expect this, so it like lowers the probability. Is that okay to use ever? Because it feels like sometimes I'm like, if they are historical eyewitness testimonies, like reporting from people up close to the facts, then we expect apparent tensions in the text. We expect differences. We expect these things. And, it's like more likely given this hypothesis.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally get it. And so basically what Tim McGrew says here, I'll see if I got a slide of his and I'll share it here. I'm going to have to stop this screen real quick though. Bear with me for just a second. So he has a paper, and I definitely recommend it.
I need to read that paper. It's funny. Yeah. One of my teachers at I go to Texas A&M. My philosophy of religion teacher, he got his master's under Tim.
Oh, did he?
So he knows Tim and Lydia.
What's his name?
Well, his name's Nevin Kleiman-Haga.
Oh, okay.
He does a lot of work on probability and epistemology and stuff. So,
dude, that's freaking awesome. And so I haven't heard of him. I was gonna say John something or other is the other guy that I know he trained. That's a philosophy professor right now. But anyways, I was wondering if it was him. But no, dude, that's awesome. I might mention that to him. And so, but yeah, so his paper, you can actually just go to timmcgrew.com and you can download it for free.
I have it downloaded. I just haven't read it yet.
Yeah. No worries. So he says there's 3 necessary conditions for a strong argument from silence. And this is it right here, that the event or fact would have certainly come to the notice of the author or authors in question, that the author or authors would have recorded or in some other clear fashion given the evidence of the fact had they noticed it, and the work or works in which this was done would have survived to the present era and come down to the notice of contemporary scholars. And so what Lydia, I've heard say, and I've even heard like David Wood use this illustration, and I think it's pretty good. Like a weak argument from silence would be, I look around in this room and I say, there's no spiders in this room. I see no spiders in this room, therefore there are no spiders from this room. Right? Well, we know spiders are able to hide pretty easy. You know what I'm saying? If I said, I see no elephants in this room, there's no elephants in this room. Well, that would be a strong argument from silence, because I would expect to see an elephant if there was one in here, right? I wouldn't expect to see a spider. And so, like to give an example, the event or fact would have had to come to the notice of the author or authors in question. And so one of the constant arguments that you hear from skeptics regarding like the slaughter of the innocents in Matthew chapter 2, right? And so they'll go, oh, Josephus never said anything about it, therefore it never would have happened. Well, like, how do we know for sure Josephus would have noticed? Yes, he does report a bunch of stupid things that Herod does, but like he also doesn't even mention that the Jews were expelled from Rome by the Emperor Claudius. Like the only first century source that we have that from is Luke. And then later in the 2nd century, we have Suetonius. Also, like Josephus is writing for a Roman audience. They're used to giving up their children to child exposure. Second, Bethlehem is a tiny little hamlet. Maybe 6 or 12 kids were killed. Terrible, tragic, but like maybe he just didn't even hear about it. Okay, like
Is this the same, like, similar thing in which people talk about the saints rising from the grave? Like, why is there nobody else who comments on this?
Yeah, and I can circle back to that one because that's a good one, because that one seems a little more spectacular, you know.
For sure.
Yeah, and so let me circle back to that one. Going to his second example, or second condition, I should say. The authors would have recorded or in some clear fashion given the evidence of the fact had they noticed it. Right? Again, like we see all kinds of, we have to calibrate our expectations because we see all kinds of crazy things, you know. Like the Magna Carta isn't mentioned in Grafton's Chronicles.
That's
like,
one that's funny. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy, you know. Or like U.S. Grant never mentions the Emancipation Proclamation, and so we just don't really know based on like our expectations. Okay, the work or works in which this was done would have survived. Obviously, you know, papyrus fades into oblivion. And so sometimes we just might not have any surviving records of anything. And so this would be, you would need these conditions for a strong argument from silence. So where I would use the argument from silence, and I can make a strong argument from silence, is, for example, you said you have the Dawa table at your university. And so Surah 355, let me, now I'll just quote it as much from memory. And Surah, I'll paraphrase it. In Surah 61:14, set this expectation that Jesus would have a victorious, dominant following until the day of resurrection. Surah 355. I'll pull it up real quick.
I have it pulled up as well.
Okay, yeah, I'll let me just bring logos back up. For some reason, I have to flip back and forth. It won't let me.
It's a pain.
Yeah, here we go.
Talking to these Dawa tables are the most fun. We have a good buddy of ours who's super devout Muslim, and he just runs through like critical New Testament scholarship with Christians who try to interact with him, and it's always so hard. I'm like, bro, like me and him will interact, and it's like, you know, we're sending articles back and forth, but most Christians aren't aware of the state of academia or don't have any good defenses, so they haven't heard of these people, and it's always frustrating.
Yeah, it is. It's funny because, I mean, I was just talking to my kids on a walk this morning, and I'm like, all they can do is like attack Christianity, but like none of that is like, therefore, Muhammad is a true prophet. Like that's all they can do is kind of like try to undermine Christianity, because it's like you could just quote like some of their goofy hadiths to them about like dipping flies into drinks or you know, like all the goofy stuff that's in there. Moses running around naked, beating up a rock, you know, and just goofy stuff. And it's like, that's not really defensible. So all you can do, like no amount of you telling me that like the Trinity is illogical or New Testament criticism is accurate is going to make me think like Muhammad is reliable. So
I had a conversation the other day, and the dude was essentially just like pressing hard or Dan McClellan's like divine image bearing Christology, and I was like, cool, like
Islam is false then.
Yeah, I know. I was like, cool. I'll take Dan's view. Islam's false.
Yeah,
and I was like sure.
Yeah,
no, but we were talking about the truth of Islam. Like, you know, if he was genuinely like we were trying to talk about Christianity, then like I would want to give a good defense. I don't want to just, you know, attack their worldview only and then not make a positive case for mine. But
I've had people try to like clip farm me on that, because I'll be like, well, if I grant that, so what? Islam is false. And they're like, oh, are you saying that the Trinity is not true? And I'm like, I'm saying, even if I granted that like your attack on the Trinity is true, based on your attack on the Bible, Islam is still false. So like, what do you like? You guys take like the littlest things as like these major victories. But anyways, strong argument from silence, and then we'll go back to Matthew Zombies. You're the only I got, Cole. So anytime you got to go, just let me know. But,
no, I'm having a great time talking. So.
Okay, good. No, this is good. These are great questions. And so, so Quran 355, and it says, I'll just remember the chapter 3. It says, and remember when Allah said, "O Jesus, I'm gathering thee and causing thee to ascend unto me, and I'm cleansing thee from those who disbelieve, and I'm setting those who follow thee above those who believe until the day of resurrection." right? And then it basically says the same kind of thing in verse 14, where it says the disciples are like, we're the helpers of Allah. And then it said that Allah strengthened them who believed against their foe, and they became uppermost. So there's this dominant followers of Jesus between now until the day of resurrection is what's supposed to happen. So that includes before Muhammad, right?
Yeah.
And so the challenge to Muslims is name one person between 40 AD and 600 AD whom you would regard as a true follower of Jesus, and give any pre-Islamic, pre-Muhammad historical source for him.
But Testify, the Ebionites, bro, the Ebionites.
The Ebionites. Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And so, so basically, they can't do it, right? Because like there's nothing, right? Now, if they say the Ebionites, you could just say, okay, well, according to Epiphanius, dude, this is crazy stuff. I just had somebody point this out to me this week. They were reading Epiphanius' Panarion, where they're talking about the Ebionites. The Ebionites believe that Jesus was an archangel. So if anything, they were closer to Jehovah's Witnesses. They have an adoptionist Christology. So they still believe Jesus is the Son of God.
Yep.
Their gospel lacked the virgin birth. And you have Eusebius in Ecclesiastical History 327 that said some deny the virgin birth. Okay, so they believe he's crucified. Some of them deny the virgin birth. They think he's the Son of God and an archangel. And also, this is the craziest part. They acknowledge Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses and Aaron, and Joshua, the son of Nun, simply as Moses' successor, although he is of no importance. But after they acknowledge no more prophets, they even anathematize David and Solomon and make fun of them. Similarly, they disregard Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, Elijah, Elisha. They pay no heed, blaspheme their prophecies, but only accept the gospel. And it's referring to the mutilated gospel of Matthew, right?
Yeah. Wait, is this in Eusebius, you said?
No, this is in Epiphanius.
Oh, okay.
It's called Panarion. Yeah,
Okay.
and so you can find it online. I couldn't find it in Logos, but you could definitely find it like on earlychurchwritings.com or something like that. And so yeah, like no Muslim is going to say that that works, right? And so what I had Dean Response tell me was like, well, that's an argument from silence, and Testify, you always make fun of the argument from silence. But like, okay, well, again, I'm not saying we have no evidence, therefore it didn't happen. I'm saying we would expect this claim to be, if it was true, we would expect to see a dominant following, right?
Yes.
Because we have records of all kinds of Christians. We have Arians, we have Gnostics, we have Montanists, we have Sabellians, we have Marcionites. We have records of all kinds of Jews, like Pharisees, Essenes, Sadducees. We have all kinds of records of different pagans, like people who followed Mithras cults and emperor worship and all this other stuff. But we don't find a dominant Islamic style Jesus movement. We don't have any record of it. We don't have a single trace, a single source. Like it just doesn't make sense. And then it's not an argument from silence, because all the history that we show says the dominant followers of Jesus was Orthodox Christianity, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not an argument from silence. It's an argument from like his history completely contradicts what you guys say. And so, so yeah, that's where I would say that's a strong argument from silence. When the Quran sets the expectation that we should definitely see a dominant group of Jesus's followers up until the day of even Muhammad, and yet like they disappear. There's not a trace of them, and the best they can say is the Ebionites, who reject most of the prophets that they don't accept, deny the virgin birth, accept the crucifixion, and say that Jesus was some kind of an archangel. Like, no, that doesn't work, you know? So
yeah.
Anyways, now going back to Matthew's zombies real quick, and then you see here the Matthews.
Do you take the position that like it actually happened, or you just kind of agnostic? Okay.
Yeah, no, I take the position that Matthew's trying to report history here. I don't take the position that Mike Lacona would say, where it's like a theological fireworks sort of thing, and it's just like some kind of what's the word? I don't know, just some kind of like apocalyptic sort of thing, right? I've heard William Lane Craig say the same thing.
I know, and I love Craig, and it always hurts me when I hear him say this. Like, I just got his 3rd volume of Systematic Philosophical Theology. I love his work so much in philosophy, but then I hear him say something like this, and I'm like, oh, Craig.
Yeah, no, me too. Yeah, totally. I Craig is great, but like he does take some of these literary kind of things that I don't really agree with. But anyways, so what does the verse say? It says the tombs were open, many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. Okay, so Matthew probably intends this event to be historical, not symbolic. Even Allison thinks that Matthew presents this as something, Dale Allison, that's something that really happened. So they're actually, for whatever it's worth, and it doesn't necessarily mean too much, but they're actually at odds. Craig and Lacona are at odds with somebody like Allison there, even though they praise Allison in other areas. So the thing that we have to keep in mind is that this passage is very brief. It's underdeveloped. So Matthew doesn't say how many saints rose. He doesn't say who they were. He doesn't say how widely they appeared. He doesn't say how long they remained. He doesn't even say what happened afterward. And so it is an argument from silence, because critics are saying if this happened, everyone would mention it. But Matthew may be describing a very limited event, several holy people appearing privately or locally to several others. I know it says many, but it doesn't really say like, what does that even mean? You know, does it mean millions of them? I don't think that's what he's talking about. Does it mean thousands even? Maybe it could be like 100. Maybe it could mean a few dozen. And so any amount of more than a few handful of dead people raising, that would probably feel like many. So, but yeah, several holy people probably appearing privately or locally to others, maybe to even people who knew about Jesus's ministry or something like that. It would just raise the prior probability for them that this actually happened. They're like, oh wow, well, I saw my dead cousin the other day and he told me, you know, like that was kind of weird. So yeah, I believe Jesus rose from the dead when the report comes out, right? And odd doesn't mean false, because this is what a lot of like skeptics will do. You constantly hear this like, oh, Matthew zombies kind of thing. Alex O'Connor really likes to throw this one out in resurrection debates because it's odd, right? But odd by itself doesn't mean false. And so the event sounds strange, but strangeness alone isn't like a historical criteria of disproof, right? And so real history includes weird, surprising, poorly explained events all the time. The timing is flexible too. Matthew says the tombs are open at Jesus' death. The saints came out and appeared after his resurrection. Alex O'Connor, I've heard him say this in a debate where he's like, oh, they're just kind of sitting there and they're just waiting. And then after they come out, right? And so, but the text doesn't require the silly picture of resurrected saints waiting around in tomb entrances from Friday to Sunday, just kind of staring and waiting out. And then it's like, okay, now we can go out. So I've heard that. Maybe you've heard that. Just throwing that out there. And then this is the point that I think Lydia McGrew does a really good job bringing up in a video where she goes into detail about this. And I definitely recommend it. Just look up like Lydia McGrew, Matthew's Rising of the Saints. She talks about Matthew's the Rising of the Saints and epistemic routing. And so we're not using this passage as a main proof that Jesus rose. Yes. Rather, we have strong independent evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. Okay. We also have strong independent evidence that Matthew is a historically reliable source, and he's got to be telling us the truth when he knows it, right? Yes. And so a smaller resurrection sign around the same event becomes much less improbable. And she makes an analogy. If your neighbor, you know, that you know very, very well, is normally telling the truth, you may be like, okay. But then he like one day tells you the story where he gets attacked in the alley by like 3 big guys and he fights them all off. And you might first be like, well, my neighbor is normally pretty honest, but like, I don't know if I believe that. But if you later go into his house and you see like an MMA belt, like belt on his mantle somewhere or on the wall, that's new evidence that raises the credibility of the earlier story. So likewise, the resurrection of Jesus raises the probability of Matthew's raised saints report, and also all the other accounts that we have, the independent reasons to think Matthew is a reliable reporter. And so, yeah, it's strange. It's brief, but it's not obviously false. And silence from other sources isn't a good enough reason to overturn it, especially if we're thinking like maybe this isn't like this exaggerated picture of zombies running out and talking to everybody in Jerusalem all at the same time. So
yeah, I can't quite put my finger on it, but I like often hear the objection that this like single source documentation like drastically discredits like a story. But then the moment there's like corroborating evidence, I get told there's just like copying, and it's like I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. Like,
yeah, no, dude, you're totally right. It is that way. It's like we need multiple sources, and then it's like, well, it's just copying. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And so, no, history is just like that. A lot of history that we have just comes from a single source. I mean, again, The expulsion of the Jews from Rome by the Emperor Claudius. Like, again, Luke is our only first century source on that.
Yeah.
And
Is there corroborating evidence outside of Luke that like he gets this right, even like non-textual evidence, maybe like archaeology?
Suetonius mentions it.
Okay.
In the 2nd century. And so, but yeah, I mean, a lot of things that we have are just from a single source, right? And so we can't just discredit single source. We would like to have more sources if we have it, but like it's by itself is not required. What we need to do is look at the one source and see where, look at the document as a whole and go, okay, well, like what can we corroborate? And wow, this guy seems to be really trustworthy more often than not. What we don't want to do is just kind of like passage by passage go, okay, we can verify this, but we don't know about that. And so we'll just act agnostic about it.
That's such a big issue I get with people when it like, because we do weekly like evangelism and apologetics with the organization we have here at A&M. And whenever Bible contradictions come up, it's like we're dissecting the text as if this is like a case by case basis. And I'm like, man, like you have to consider the text as a whole. And it's like, man, this is why sometimes going through individual contradictions, sometimes it's so frustrating because it's just like they're never ending, but then you never get to talk about why Luke's reliable or something.
Yeah. Again, it's the fallacy of objections. And so the fallacy of objections, let me see if I can find the actual quote. I should have that really. This is Richard Whately, writing in the, here, I'll even put it on screen. Let's see. All right. Let me see if I can embiggen here. All right. Yeah, this is Richard Whately. He's writing in a book of logic. This is a 18th century guy. He says, similar to the case which may be called the fallacy of objections, actually showing their objections against some plan, theory, or system, thence inferring that it should be rejected when that which ought to have been proved, that there are more stronger objections against the receiving than the rejecting of it. And then he says, this is the main, almost universal fallacy of anti-Christians, that is, which a young Christian should be first and principally warned. They find numerous objections against various parts of Scripture to which no satisfactory answer can be given, and the incautious hearer is apt, while his attention is fixed on these, to forget that there are infinitely more and stronger objections against the supposition that the Christian religion is of human origin, and that we cannot answer all objections. We are bound in reason and candor to adopt the hypothesis which labors under the least. Right. He goes on to say that the case is, as I've stated, I am authorized to assume from this circumstance that no complete and consistent account has ever been given of the manner in which the Christian religion, supposing it a human contrivance, could have risen and prevailed against as it did. And then so basically you have to look at the pluses and you have to look at the minuses, right? And so people want to just focus on, well, what about this objection? What about this objection? What about this objection? But even any kind of like theory that we have that's like a good working theory, there's going to be like sometimes anomalous data. That's when the first question that you had about the cursing of the fig tree, right? There might be some data that we just don't know how to resolve, that like there's just like this tension there and we're like, I don't know. But then like I look at like, say for instance, Luke Acts, and I see like literally like dozens of undesigned coincidences, dozens of external confirmations in history. And I'm like, yeah, this dude really knew what he was talking about. And he's in a position to know, and he's getting his sources from people who would be in a position to know, like Mark's gospel, for example. Like, what if I can't necessarily perfectly resolve with 100% clarity the census issue? Like I think I can actually, but like I think I can. Well, maybe not 100%, pretty close. And so it's like big whoop-de-doo. Like the argument on the positive is way stronger than the argument for the negative. So I could just go, I don't really know, but that doesn't destroy the central thing, right? Like so.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Also, I don't know your exact opinion on like Q and the development and blah 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 of like who's drawing on what sources, but like you said, it seems to count in favor of the Gospels if like Matthew is drawing on Mark and then Matthew deviates from Mark, that like he has a reason to deviate. It seems like if you're just trying to, you know, come up with a conspiracy, that deviation from the prior source would be like just a purely illogical move to make.
Yeah. Yeah. They're acting like dependence is either an all or nothing thing. It's as if like somebody can't like read a story, adopt it, and go, I'm going to change it right here. Not because I'm getting creative and I'm pulling stuff out of my rear end, but because I know more. There's more information here. I'm privy to witnesses, or I was there myself. And
Yeah.
so, like, yeah, it's an ancient source that they borrowed, that they used, that they copied in some cases, but it's not like there was this like stigma of plagiarism at the time or something like that. And it's like he's got a source from a witness. Why not use it? And then when you are able to supplement it, then just go ahead and supplement it, like big whoop de doo. And so, yeah, it's a weird thing. I don't know why that they're just like so black and white about it, but that's what they do. So.
I have a question about like preservation of the Gospels and transmission. Sure. Like, what like would be a sufficient criteria that we could use when evaluating the transmission of Scripture, and like what outside sources external to the biblical canon like point to the accurate transmission of this? Because like,
yeah, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize. But basically, we have the church fathers writing where they do quote the source, and so it's like the quotes basically match for the most part the manuscripts, and so it's kind of like, and you know that at times they're paraphrasing, right? And that's fine. We expect that, but when the message is basically the same, that's just kind of how I look at it. I'm not like a like manuscript expert by any stretch of the imagination, because I find it to be an uninteresting question, because most people, skeptic, non-skeptical, are like, we pretty much have the text. It's like, whatever, we're not really, even if we.
Is that the consensus in scholarship? Because I was trying to bring this up to my buddy. He's like, I don't think it is, but I feel like I've seen Bart Ehrman even say like, oh, we have like 95% of the original or whatever. And I'm like, 95 is good enough. Like, 95% of the Gospels, and like, I'm good.
Yeah. So Bart Ehrman, here's a quote. I have it on my blog here. This is the Misquoting Jesus, one of the earlier editions, page 285. He talks about him and Bruce Metzger. Bruce Metzger, of course, is an evangelical Christian. And he says, Bruce is one of the greatest scholars of modern times, and I've dedicated my book to him because he was both my inspiration for going into textual criticism and the person who trained me in the field. I have nothing but respect and admiration for him, but even though we may disagree on important parts of religious questions, he's a firmly committed Christian and I'm not. We are in complete agreement that on a number of very important historical and textual questions, he and I were put in a room, this is the important part, and asked to hammer out a consensus statement on what we think the original text of the New Testament looked like. There would be very few points of disagreement, maybe 1 or 2 dozen places out of many thousands. And he said, the position that I argue for in Misquoting Jesus does not stand actually at odds with Professor Metzger's position that the essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition. And so, like,
it's on your blog. I need to go grab that.
yeah. It's just look up Bart Ehrman. I'll put this in the chat. Let's see. I'll put it in the private chat too. I don't know, whichever you decide to open first. And so, yeah, I don't think that it affects anything at all. And so it's just kind of an interesting question because people are just mostly settled on it. I know there's like points of contention, and Bart will be like, but these are really important points. And I'm like, are they really though? So, yeah. Anyway,
another thing I got told by one of our skeptical buddies, who's not a Christian, he was formerly a Christian, and we were talking about just the gospel reliability and stuff, and I was just like giving him some arguments for early dating, and he was like, yeah, like, sure, like those are sound arguments, like I agree with you, and he's like, I still think even if they're written within 20 years, there's like a culture of exaggeration. There's like they live in a culture where, you know, dead people rising from the dead wouldn't have been insane. I mean, they think magic is true, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, so even like if Mark did write early, all these gospels are early, he's like, I still struggle to find them like credible.
Yeah.
That seems super strange to me, because I was like, man, like, if they're trying to report eyewitness testimony and truthful,
sure,
they have these like polymodal experiences with the risen Jesus, and like the best explanation is the resurrection, if we're not presupposing like materialism.
I'll answer this one briefly, because now all of a sudden I got a line. So no, I appreciate you, man. No, these are great questions. And so this on the last one here, basically, I think you're right. Is first of all, this is like chronological snobbery, as C.S. Lewis would dub it, where it's just like ancient people knew that dead people stay dead and virgins don't give birth. Okay. They understood that. Okay. I understand that they had a context in their mind of like supernatural things are possible because they're theists. They believe in God. Okay. They're Jews. They believe that Moses split the Red Sea, for crying out loud. Okay. And so it's not that they're like completely unopen to these things. They think angels exist. They think God exists. They think demons exist, so but that doesn't make them automatically gullible or credible. I mean, if you even look at like the way the witness reports are in the Gospels, they didn't believe the women's story at first. They thought they were idle tales. And so there is skepticism like at that time, right? It's not like they just wholesale believed everything. And then like you said, you have to go back to what are the authors of the Gospels like? Are they close up to the facts? Are they habitually truthful? Do they show themselves to be knowledgeable? So if that's the case, then what are they reporting? If they're reporting what the original eyewitnesses, if their reports go what the eyewitnesses said, the kind of things that they report are not the kind of things that one would easily be mistaken about. And so it's just kind of like, I think, sure, you could be mistaken if you have a supernatural worldview and people think they see apparitions and all kinds of things without solid evidence. But when you have like solid things that are very difficult to be mistaken about, that's a whole lot different. And so, again, that's just kind of Western chronological snobbery is how I would summarize that skepticism.
Makes sense. Sweet. Well, I appreciate you talking to me.
Yeah, cool. No, these are awesome questions. Come back anytime, bro. And I appreciate it.
Of course. You have a good one.
Yeah, you too. All right. I'm going to prefer people with cameras. So I got one guy who says device is not connected. So I think he said he's working on it. We'll bring up Jesse because he was the first one with both a camera and a mic ready to roll. So what's up, Jesse?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm hoping my question will be quick. So
yeah, good.
Just for a bit of context, I'm like an ex-Mormon. So I really appreciate your work. And I'm just curious, do you have something similar to the Islamic dilemma for like the Book of Mormon? Because a lot of what I'll see from Christian apologetics online is that they'll go after Joseph Smith for one reason or another. And, there's all sorts of things you can criticize Joseph Smith for. But I think there's a reason that the Mormon Church gives people Book of Mormons to get them into the church rather than Joseph Smith. And I just rarely see Christians going like, here's where in the Book of Mormon, that it's like disagreeing with the Bible.
Yeah, I do have something that's similar to the Islamic dilemma. And maybe you've seen this video, so interrupt me if you don't, or if you haven't. But let me remember here. Bear with me for just a second. I'm going to pull up an old script here. I 61:6. I should have a note on this already, but I don't. Oh, that's not it. 61. Let's see. This will work. This is fine. All right. So going off memory, so it's very similar to the Islamic dilemma, but it's like a different kind of Islamic dilemma. Okay. And so in Surah 61:6, it talks about Jesus prophesying the existence of Muhammad, like the coming of Muhammad. And then you could ask your Muslim friend, like, where does the text say that Jesus is coming, right? And they're going to go like, I don't have a text, or they'll point to something goofy, right? They'll point to some like really weak prophecy, like, oh, the Comforter is coming, and it's like, dude, that's the Holy Spirit. Don't be a goofball. And so basically, what we do is it's kind of like a lost.
I think I know where you're going with this. You're going to like the Joseph prophecy in
Yeah.
BSD. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have seen this. The thing is, with this, why I could see someone getting around this is if you go to the Book of Mormon, and you have the
Mm.
same prophecy in there, and you have Lehi. It's a slightly extended version. He's talking
Yeah.
about it, and
Right.
at the end of the verse, he actually says he's talking to his children, and he tells them that they don't need to worry that their offspring will be wiped out because of this prophecy. So if that's the case, that this prophecy is talking about Joseph Smith, that wouldn't make sense in the context of the text, because the text says that it's for the descendants of Lehi.
They say that it's for the
I
descendants of
think if you
Lehi.
go to 2nd Nephi 24 is where it talks about that.
I can look it up. So basically, the general idea is you don't have a text that we can verify, because what is a prophecy supposed to do? A prophecy, you're supposed to be able to look outside of the person's claims and go, yes, you were foretold because I
Yeah.
have this external witness, right? But when it's a self-authenticating witness of like, hey, this particular prophet told me about predicted my coming, but yet this particular prophet's prophecy disappeared and God re-revealed the prophecy. So in God's infinite genius and infinite wisdom, who did he re-reveal the prophecy through? He revealed it through me. Then it's
Yeah.
like, that's kind of like me, like, writing a positive review for my own channel on YouTube or something, on Facebook or something like that. It's like, I'm foretold, guys, just trust me, right? And also it's
Yeah.
circular, because it's not just like stupid, but it's like, in order to believe in the prophecy, I have to believe in the prophet. In order to believe in the prophet, I have to believe in the prophecy. God's not an idiot. So I'm looking for the verse. You said 2nd Nephi 24.
I thought it was 24. It might
Okay.
not be. I can try to look for it as well.
No worries. No worries.
Let's see.
And so basically the move that I make is I just will ask like a Mormon. I'll say, hey, I'm going to get you to convert to Islam. And then I'll quote them.
Oh, it's chapter 3. My bad.
Chapter 3. Oh, okay. No problem. I'll look it up. And I'll say, okay. And 2nd Nephi 3. And I'll say, is it 3:15?
So if I look at 15,
If I seem to
yes,
remember
that's where it
this, what
talks
was.
about him being Joseph.
Yeah.
But I think if you scroll down, he tells him, and now behold, my son Joseph, after this manner did my father of old prophesy. Wherefore, because of this covenant, thou art blessed, for thy seed shall not be destroyed. But Joseph never claims to be descended from Lehi. So if that's the case, then the text internally would suggest that it's actually not referring to Joseph, even if it's like a coincidence that it is the same kind of named after his father thing. And that's why I'm
Sure.
concerned, like, if someone could take that position and say it's consistent within the text to say that's not actually Joseph Smith, then it could kind of get out of that.
Yeah, totally. No, I could see that. Most Mormons that I've talked to when I've shared this, and I mean, I'm not saying I've talked to Mormons every day, but most Mormons that I talk to agree that this is a prophecy about Joseph Smith. And so my question would be like, what is the Mormon church position on who, like, Genesis 53 is about?
Yes. The issue I've found with that is that they'll take this position. I mean, if someone's like a Mormon, they're in the Latter-day Saint Church, then they'll take this position because, if you actually scroll up to the top in the chapter summary, that's basically what it says, is that it's prophesying Joseph. But for me, like, I know a lot of people, how you have like all sorts of different sects of Islam, for example.
Yeah,
You'll
sure.
have people who believe all sorts of different things. There's actually kind of a similar thing for Mormons, just on a smaller scale, because there's less of them. And so that's where I'm coming from. Because if you have someone who's like, well, I understand that Joseph wasn't really a great guy, but I think his only job was to translate the Book of Mormon, then they'd have no problem saying, oh, the church is wrong about this. They're wrong about him being prophesied right here. And so I'm just curious if there's...
I mean, I guess I would probably put it in just a terms of likelihood. And so, first of all, if Joseph Smith is already, you can have independent evidence that he wasn't necessarily the most honest person. And you could talk to them about, say, like the Book of Abraham, for example. You could talk about the situation where he basically is like, Emma, you must accept multiple wives, because if not, the angel's going to get you. And just multiple times where it's like there's shadiness. Then, of course, a shady person, there's already kind of a high probability that they're going to write a prophecy adding to the Bible and saying this is a lost prophecy about myself. So it's not like a slam dunk. I could see if they could take this this route of like, well, Joseph is not actually talking about himself because of Lehi, but then it's like, okay, well, now you're going against the consensus of like even the editors of the Book of Mormon and the Mormon Church and all this other stuff, and so it's like it doesn't seem very likely to me. And so it's kind of like you're making them pay like a bit of an epistemic price to take a minority position just to get an out. You know what I'm saying?
Possibly. I think by this time, it's not like they're taking this position just so they can get out of this. It's that
Mhm.
they already have this position, and so from their point of view, it's like I'm not ditching the church over this. Like they had
Yeah.
other reasons for thinking they were wrong already.
Yeah.
For one example, if you look at the Book of Commandments from 1833, in chapter 4, it's a alleged revelation to like Sidney Rigdon. Oh, no, not Sidney Rigdon.
Yeah.
But it's Joseph Smith and Martin Harris, I think. And it says that like Joseph Smith, it tells them that his only gift is to translate the book, which would be, the Book of Mormon. It's his only gift is to translate the book, and he'll be given no other gift. So they'd look at something like that and say, see, Joseph was already told that this was his only job to translate the
Well,
book. So
that would go against Doctrines and Covenants, where it talks
it
about
would.
Joseph is like the greatest person to ever live since Jesus.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
The point is that it's earlier. So they'd say this actually supersedes that because he didn't actually have the authority to do those later things.
Well, now you're dealing with somebody who's already molding Mormonism to shape whatever they can. And I understand there are splits. There's FLDS. There's the more Community of Christ. There's all these different like splinter groups and different things like that. And I know like Community of Christ, for example, definitely takes a more liberal kind of approach to some of the stuff. And so I don't know. To me, I wish I had like a better answer, but to me, it's like you're already reinventing Mormonism just to hold on to this for like what? And so now you have just all the other evidence against Mormonism, the lack of historical confirmation, the shadiness of Joseph Smith. Like at what point, you'd have to ask them, like, what is even your reason to be a Mormon if you're like willing to like take this almost overly historical critical approach to your own faith? Like what is actually causing you to like hang on at this point? Because like if you keep going historical critical with your stuff and picking and choosing which text you're going to end up keeping, then you're just going to turn into Dan McClellan at the end and not really have much of a profession of faith and a standing in the church for some reason, but with no actual evidence to support it.
Yeah. I do think they take a position that's basically it's the Book of Mormon and that's it. And, they have their reasons for doing so. It's not quite just a buffet of I'm going to pick whatever I want because they'll just say anything after that. I mean, it might be true, but I don't care, essentially. And like I said, there's a lot more context and history I could get into for why someone might take that position. That's just why I was asking in the Book of Mormon. If there's anything more concrete, because the Islamic dilemma, it's very clear. It's like it confirms the previous scriptures over and over and over, and then it directly contradicts them. And so
my biggest thing with Mormonism, just taking an evidential approach, is I would just say, number one, the Book of Mormon just contradicts the prior revelation. And I know they could try to argue that it doesn't, but I think
that's kind of why I'm asking. Like, if you have another good example, I don't know if I've seen it. The only ones I ever see is like, it's like, oh, we're saved by faith after all we can do, and it's like that's clearly saying that even after everything you can do, you're saved by your faith, not by your works. And it's like it's a very easy thing to just read it slightly differently, and it's not a contradiction. So if you have anything else, then I'd love to see it.
Yeah, that is a common one. I would just say, I mean, overall, but when Mormons do talk about justification, it's not the justification that Paul preached at all. I mean, if you look at their own apostles, it's not the same justification by faith at all. They basically treat like after you do everything you can do, then the blood kicks in. I mean, that's what they've said. Now, again, this goes back to like just straight from the LDS, like recent sources and different things like that. So they'd have to be bus checking them. And so now again, you're dealing with a very highly specific, very eclectic Mormon at this point.
It is. I understand that.
Yeah. And so that's part of it.
If you could find something in the Book of Mormon, you could use it against like anyone, even these very niche types of people.
My main argument, this is my main argument against Mormonism, is you just don't have evidence. You don't have evidence. Okay. And so I could say I have good evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
and that the evidence that you have, like just say like the three, okay, Martin Harris, his vision happened later, okay, that was separate. Joseph basically primed these guys saying, hey, we're going to pray, we're going to go out in the woods, we're going to do all this stuff, and then, you know, you're going to, this is, you know, maybe if through the eyes of faith, you know, and it even says in Doctrines and Covenants, like by faith, you'll see this. It's like, okay, well, like, first of all, he's hiding the plates so that thieves don't come and steal them from him. But like, you got to pray and make sure that you have faith to see the plates. That's just a contradiction. That's illogical. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Okay. Then when the angel does come and they like, supposedly they hear a voice and they like hefted the plates or whatever, like, first of all, plates themselves, like, I don't really care about plates. That's not the same thing as touching your dead rabbi after he's been crucified, right? 3 days later, because he's resurrected from the dead. That's just plates. An angel, sure, they didn't know this person, this angel or whatever. Like, I don't know. Is there any details of the testimony other than they heard a voice and saw some plates underneath a sheet? Not really. And so like the caliber of witness testimony, and this is where like I have my beef with like Alex O'Connor when he debated Trent Horn, is he's like, well, witnesses, same thing, potato. And it's like the quality of the witness situation is like totally different. Peter did not say, hey, come out in the woods with me, guys. And like 3 days we pray. And if we're worthy by faith, we'll see Jesus. Like, no, like that didn't happen. Okay. And then on top of that, like, oh, by the way, we're praying and you're kind of a hindrance, Martin, so go away. But then maybe you'll get your experience later. Like it's all super sketchy to begin with. And so it just doesn't compare to multiple polymodal, extended across time experiences with the risen Jesus. And so it's like, why would I accept your additional claims when like the original Christianity is just like much more simple? There's no evidence for some great apostasy. And like, frankly, based on the way your apostles teach and what I see in the Book of Mormon, guess what? There's a contradiction. And not only that, I have all kinds of corroboration externally from the Old Testament, or excuse me, from the New Testament, of like little details of all kinds of like archaeological things and historical things where I can actually have confirmation. I don't have any confirmation of an ancient civilization coming from Israel on boats to America. I know they could say, well, it could have been a bunch of different places and things disappear, but it's just like, I'm not expecting necessarily to find something, but I just have nothing. So it's like, I have one worldview with tons of evidence, and I have you coming along and saying, plus Joseph Smith, like just by Occam's razor, it's like, I have no need for your Joseph Smith. You know what I mean? Like there's
so you just say that the burden of proof is on them, and there's not enough evidence that could be
100%.
Not that it's impossible to provide enough evidence, just that like you can't really for this particular view.
Yeah, there's just like you have an evidential burden to meet, just like I have an evidential burden to meet. I can meet, I believe, pretty like I can give a top heavy base factor for the resurrection of Jesus Christ and, you know, him fulfilling messianic prophecy and claiming to be God. I can't get a top heavy base factor for that Joseph Smith is a genuine prophet that had a real revelation based on your eyewitness testimony arguments.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and then I take all the other sketchiness about Joseph Smith, and it's just like, and Jesus even said, you'll know them by their fruits. It's kind of like, okay, I understand that there's a lot of Mormons that are nice people and they like to use that argument as their fruits, but Joseph himself didn't have those fruits. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I kind of wholesale park it. Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. And I understand. I've been on here for a bit. You just keep mentioning like you do have maybe a little bit more Book of Mormon. So if you could just, do you have like one more example from the Book of Mormon you could show me, and then I'll,
not really from the Book of Mormon, as far as like something Islamic dilemma related. I wish there was like a thing like that. Unfortunately, like Joseph didn't like really like he kind of did kind of go, well, as long as things are translated correctly, and you got to trust me for the translation. But like, there's not like where you see in the Quran where they're constantly affirming a text that it completely disagrees with, and so it's not like he didn't really set himself up for that much failure. What I would recommend is there's a good book by Robert Bowman called let's see, Bowman, Jesus' resurrection, Jesus' resurrection and Joseph's visions, examining the foundations of Christianity and Mormonism. And basically what it does is it goes through the difference between he basically makes an argument for the resurrection, and then he takes the same kind of argument that he would make for the resurrection and he applies it to Joseph Smith, and he finds Joseph to be completely not credible.
Gotcha.
Versus the argument that we have for the resurrection. And he basically takes the opposite approach of like Alex O'Connor, and he's like, look, there's parity, and he's like, yeah, I think we can actually meet that challenge, and it comes up woefully short.
Gotcha.
That's, as me as an evidentialist, that's the number one way that I would go through it. It just takes more historical space.
Yeah, and that's what I was hoping to avoid, just because the historical case, it's so easy for someone to go, well, blah blah blah, so and so.
I felt it in my heart. Yeah.
It never ends. There's always another
Yeah.
thing they can add on top to just kind of wiggle out of it a little bit. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. These are great questions. I am working on a video where I'm going to compare, because like I said, Alex really triggered me with his crappy comparison. So I am working on a video hopefully soon where I'll draw the comparisons.
Oh, I did have one more thing for you, which is
Sure.
that there's actually sort of another kind of dilemma thing you could use. It's not in the context I was talking about, but just for regular Mormons. If you are able to find Hiram Smith's 1844 April 8th conference talk, and you have to find a specific handwritten version because the transcript is actually slightly off. He says, I'll quote, I wish the elders of Israel to know that it is lawful for a man to marry a wife, but it is not lawful to marry more. And God has not commanded anyone to marry more. So he said that God had not commanded anyone to marry more wives. And Brigham Young later said something to the effect of, God has always commanded his servants to marry more than one wife.
Oh,
so
that's cool. Yeah, that's
if I can stay in the back room for a bit, I can maybe find the link. I think I have it on my little private server, so I can send that to you. It's just kind of hard to read because it's handwritten and it's a little odd, but I'll try to find the page for you and just let you know.
Yeah, totally. I'll keep you backstage.
Okay,
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Good questions. All right. No, it's good stuff. Good old Joseph Smith. Yeah, I'm excited about this video because the more I look at this stuff, and I'm using Bowman as kind of the foundation for the video. It'll be a little bit longer, like a 20-minute presentation kind of thing. But yeah, the appearances just don't compare. Modern Atheism, what's up, bro?
Hi, what's up?
How's it going?
Good, and you?
Good. I'm running to the point where I'm gonna have to do these a little more short and sweet because I do have a bit of a queue and I'm running out of time. So
okay.
I
made a live with Richard Carrier like a few days ago on undecided coincidences.
No, you did.
Yeah.
Jonathan texted me. He wants to do a response to that.
Oh yeah, that will be very interesting. Yes.
Yeah. We're
I think in my opinion, I think you have one good one. I think it's the one of the feeding of the 5,000. I do grant that it does seem like there is a lot of things that point to Passover in Mark, and John is the one who says that, right? I think that's the only one really. I think the strongest one. Yeah. Look, okay, we can go to that one, but to give you an example, I want to talk to you about another one. I want to get your opinion on this. For example, the part on.
Are you just talking about the Gospels, or are you talking about the ones between Acts and Paul's letters?
Only the Gospels. I haven't looked at the ones.
Only the Gospels.
Okay. Yeah, I know that Jonathan McClatchy talks a lot about Acts, but look, for example, the one where Mark and Matthew says that people were accusing Jesus of saying, I will destroy this temple built with hands, and in 3 days I will make another not built with hands. And then you have John, which doesn't say that people were accusing Jesus of that, but he tells us when did this happen. He has Jesus tell that in the cleansing of the temple, right? You know what I'm talking about. I think, in my opinion, it looks like a strong one, but I think John read that part in Mark and decided to make a scene around that. John just I'm gonna use those words and I'm gonna invent a scene where Jesus say that. I think that's what happens, right?
You think that's what happened?
Yeah, I think that's what John may have done. Like they wanted to make their own version of the stories, right? Yeah, he didn't want to make a copy of Mark. I think that's so. I think John is perfectly plausible.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why I don't think that's very plausible. And so first of all, so for those who don't know, I'll cover the undesign coincidence just to keep the audience like not in the dark. Although I know most people probably heard me use this example before. And so in Mark 14:56 through 59, it says, "For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony didn't agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, 'We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands.' Yet even about this, their testimony didn't agree." Okay, so this says that the witnesses accused Jesus, saying he would destroy the temple and rebuild another in 3 days. And Mark calls this false testimony. But the accusation is super specific. It mentions the temple. It mentions 3 days. So it sounds like a distorted, garbled version of something that Jesus actually said. Yet Mark never tells us what the original saying was. And so, again, just filling people in. So John 2:18 through 22, the Jews said to him, "What sign?" Jesus cleanses the temple. Now, notice that he cleanses the temple at the beginning of his ministry, in the 2nd chapter. Okay, where in Mark's gospel, he cleanses the temple in the 11th chapter towards the end of his ministry. Okay, and so, but anyways, the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, in 3 days I'll raise it up." Then the Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple," which we actually know independently from Josephus that was the case, and that dates this to 27 AD. "And I will raise it up in 3 days." But he was speaking about the temple that is his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he said this, and they believed the scripture, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. Okay. So John 18 through 22, it supplies the missing background. After the temple cleansing, Jesus says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up." John explains that he was talking about the temple of his body. So Jesus did speak of his temple being raised in 3 days, but he did not say that he would destroy the Jerusalem temple. He did not say that he would build another physical temple not made with hands. So this is like a garbled version. And so Mark gives the distorted accusation, but not the original. John gives the original saying, but not the later accusation. Now, the reason why I think this dovetail is stronger is because John and the synoptics differ on the temple cleansing chronology. In the synoptics, the temple cleansing occurs near the end of Jesus's ministry, right? But in John, it occurs at the beginning. Yeah. Now, I don't think that this is like a contradiction. I think that like, you could do, just like somebody could protest at the same like abortion clinic more than one time and like something happened, a similar protest like could happen more than once. Okay. And so, but if John is like inventing this scene based on something that he read in Mark, first of all, when Jesus is before like Pilate or the Sanhedrin or anybody in his trial, this accusation, "Destroy this temple and in 3 days I'll raise it up," it never comes out. It's never like this accusation made against him later. And then also, like, if he's copying Mark, like, why does he like talk about the temple cleansing at the beginning of his gospel? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. So how do you make sense of that?
Okay, first of all, you know that many theologians do think that John moved the cleansing of the temple. I think we talked about this one, so I don't want to repeat all my arguments, but I think we actually talk about this one. It's only some people, the more conservative ones, are the ones who think that there were 2 cleansings of the temple. But many interpreters, commenters do think that John simply decided to move it. I don't know why he decided to do that, really. I have no idea. But many people do say that, like Rainbow Brow, like many serious commentators do think that he just moved it. I don't know why.
Yeah. So I don't think that really works because like the chronology differs clearly. John, again, it's the early ministry right after Cana and Capernaum. The synoptics, it's the final week after the triumphant entry. John has specific details that the other ones don't include. He talks about a whip of cords. He talks about a sheep of oxen. He talks about coins being poured out. He says, "Stop making my house, Father's house, a place of business." There's this immediate challenge of like, give us a sign. And Jesus has this thing where the synoptic details are different. It talks about, his house being a house of prayer, the den of robbers, they're turning it into a den of robbers. He stops people from carrying merchandise to the temple. The leaders seek to destroy him. The authority challenge does come, but it's not later. And so Lydia McGrew talks about like the shared words, temple, sellers, tables, doves, money changers are exactly what you would expect in any protest against the temple commerce. Those similarities don't prove that it's the same event, and repeating the protest is possible. If the merchants returned after the first cleansing, Jesus could just naturally protest it against years later. And so it's hardly an artificial harmonization to think Jesus did this twice, separated by 3 years or more. The two accounts are similar at generic levels, but they're different in very specific details. And that's exactly what we would expect if Jesus made the same kind of prophetic protest twice. And in Mark, even after the final cleansing, Jesus returns to the temple the next day and keeps teaching. So it's not obvious that an earlier cleansing would have made continued ministry impossible, because some people say, well, this would have just got him killed on the spot or something like that. And so, I just don't see it as like a very, if you're copying, this is a really crappy way of doing it. So is it impossible? No. Is it what I think is most probable? Like, absolutely not. I don't think that it's most probable at all. I think this is an undesigned coincidence. I think it does fit on the hypothesis of eyewitness testimony better than these guys are just making stuff up. So,
yeah, okay, but you do realize that if Jesus said those words at the beginning of his ministry, and then 3 years later, people brought that up, those words in his trial. Okay, those people really have an incredibly good memory, right? Bringing up something he said 3 years ago instead of bringing up something more recent, you realize that this doesn't match.
If he's talking about destroying the temple, that would stick out to me. Imagine if you were at the U.S. Capitol, right? And there was somebody there who's like, I'm going to destroy this place. You'd be like, holy crap, what is going on right now? Everybody hates President Trump right now. They've tried to assassinate him like 4 different times. That is going to be extremely memorable. You might not remember everything that he said, and you might bring up a very garbled version of what that person said, but you remember the gist enough of like, this person said he's going to do X, Y, and Z, and that's kind of creepy and kind of weird. And so I don't find that to be implausible, like at all. Like that makes total sense to me.
Yeah, but it makes more sense to me to accuse him of something like more recent, because someone will ask, okay, when did he say that? And you will be like, okay, I think 3 years ago. And I'm like, okay, that's too long ago,
Well, if somebody threatens to kill the president, or somebody threatens to bomb the U.S. Capitol, you're not going to take that like less seriously because they said it 3 years ago.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Yeah, but anyway, so is your point, to be clear, is your point that if John was doing that, he will not contradict the chronology, or is that your point?
Yeah, I'm saying it doesn't contradict the chronology. I think that it's just 2 different cleansings, and I think that the fact that they are 2 different cleansings, and John doesn't narrate, like he only narrates one earlier cleansing, and he gives us different details of what the event was like than what we see in the synoptic accounts. That I think, sure, there's vague similarities because it's the same thing, but yeah, I just don't think that's a good. It's a good argument against this being an undesigned coincidence. I think it's pretty clear that this is independent.
Okay.
Or at least it's more probable than not.
Oh, Dan wants to join you.
Oh, he does.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, man, step up, Than, if you want to.
If you have a few minutes to discuss the one of Philip, I think is the strongest one. The one of Philip.
You like the Philip one?
I think the strongest one is the Philip one, and the freedom of the 5,000. Look, here's my explanation. Here's how I will try to argue against that, because it does seem like if John was going to tell us Philip was going to really look that this was in Bethsaida, and he said that Philip was from Bethsaida, it seems like John would have included in his story Philip was from Bethsaida, and that's why Jesus asked him, where to buy food. It does seem like John getting Philip on purpose he will say that. But here's my explanation. Okay, there are three people from Bethsaida. John says Philip, Peter, and Andrew. So if John is getting a random disciple, he has at least 1 in a 4 chance to get one guy from Bethsaida. So at least by chance, by pure chance, we already are at 25%. Now, you might say they don't get disciples at random. They usually get Peter or James or something like that. And I would say, yes, that's right. But John does tend to get Philip more. John simply likes to, he gives him far more lines than the other synoptics. John has this tendency to get Philip more. So maybe I think it's just by coincidence, by chance, John happens to get Philip more and Philip happened to be from Bethsaida. I think
sure. Yeah. No, I understand. And so let me, just for people who don't know the Undesigned Coincidence, I'll just kind of run through it with them. I'm sure most people have heard this one. And so in John 6:5, Jesus asked Philip, where could they buy bread for the crowd, right? And so Philip's not a major disciple like Peter, John, or Judas. It's kind of a strange thing. And John also gets Andrew involved. But we do read in a separate passage where, you're right, John definitely does mention Philip a little bit more. And Philip speaks like a couple times. And it says that in a completely separate passage that Philip was from Bethsaida, right? And it says it in John 20:21. And then, of course, Luke lets us know that the feeding of the 5,000 was in Bethsaida. So, yeah, it makes sense. Like, okay, if you're looking to find out where you're going to feed a crowd, you're going to ask the local guy, right? Now, it does say in John's gospel that Peter was from Bethsaida. It says Andrew was from Bethsaida. It says Philip was from Bethsaida. So right now you have like 75% of the disciples are all from Bethsaida, right? Right. So like he's probably going to ask somebody from Bethsaida. Like the chances are already pretty high. No, I kind of agree with you there. I don't think this is like necessarily the strongest example of an undesigned coincidence, but I do think that it is a good example of an undesigned coincidence. And so because number one, the passage where it's mentioned that Philip is from Bethsaida is completely disconnected from the feeding of the 5,000. And John never even mentions where the feeding of the 5,000 is. Yeah. We only see that in Luke's gospel. And Luke doesn't mention the question of where the feeding or the question to Philip, right? And so they do dovetail together quite nicely. Now, the other thing, the reason why I think that it's a little stronger than that is that Andrew, like I said, is also from Bethsaida, but he also gets involved. And it says, in one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are these for so many? And so Andrew, who also is involved, he might have even known this kid. He could have been a local kid who he like knows. Like, why would the kid just like randomly approach a stranger? It kind of would make more sense if like, this is somebody I recognize. This is a hometown guy. I've seen him before. This is Andrew. I'll go talk to him. Than just like a random kid coming up and talking to you. And so I think there is that. And Andrew's involvement makes sense because he's from Bethsaida. And then you put them together, I think the detail makes sense. But I don't even think this is really like necessarily the strongest example of an undesigned coincidence in there. But to push back on your point about like, and Philip is like kind of a major character in John's gospel. He speaks a total of like 2 times, I think. He's mentioned like 3 or 4 times. So he's hardly like a major player. Like, and so I wouldn't really say like Philip is like main character in this particular one. So does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think he's a bit more main character in John, right? But I don't know. I will have to look it up again. I don't know if that.
Well, I mean, here we could just look it up right now. So sure. Philip, watch. Philip is mentioned in John's gospel.
7
the question, there is Greeks see Jesus, they come to Philip, and that's when they say he's from Bethsaida. John 14:8, Philip said, Lord, show us the Father. Yep. That's enough for us. That's it. 3 times. 3
really?
3 times. Well, no, I don't want to overstate. He's mentioned when Jesus calls Philip and Nathaniel. And so he's kind of mentioned in chapter 1 a little bit.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah. But to put it in perspective, it's 3 times compared to, let's say, 0 from Bartolomeo. You know, I think people say this all the time, that John likes to spotlight Philip a bit more than the other synoptics.
Well, you could just, yeah, I mean, but you could make that argument if Jesus turned around and said to Thomas, where are we going to find bread
Really?
so that these people meet? Well, he appears to Thomas, like Thomas talks a
Okay.
couple times. And so these are still minor disciples that have like zero speaking role in the synoptics and have like minimal speaking role in John's gospel. Peter is still the front and center main apostle in all of this. Judas is also very much highlighted. And so is it possible? Sure. Is it probable? No. There's also the fact that there's just many, many other undesigned coincidences in the full feeding of the 5,000 that I think are
I
even
agree.
stronger, that just kind of goes, well, if this one seems to kind of fit, then and there's other ones and it's cumulative thing,
Yeah,
then
that's
it
right.
kind of makes more sense. And
No,
so,
that's fair. I think the
yeah,
cumulative case there is very strong. Like a lot
well,
of things pointing to Passover, you know. So
yeah,
yeah, that's
well,
what I say. I think that's the only good one, in my opinion.
well, let me show you one that I think is kind of cool.
Okay.
I mean, this has involved the feeding of the 5,000, and I'll let you go and go to the next year, unless you got more pushback, and that's totally fine.
No, that's fine. That's don't
All
want
right.
to take a lot of time.
Yeah. So Luke mentions that the feeding of the 5,000 happens in Bethsaida in Luke 9:10, right? But in Matthew's gospel, it talks about just kind of out of the nowhere, it seems like Jesus says, "Woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida. For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes." Now, Matthew says that Bethsaida was judged because of the mighty works done there, and they didn't repent, but he never tells us what mighty miracles happened in Bethsaida. Matthew later does narrate the feeding of the 5,000, but he doesn't name the location. Matthew names also often very narrates by theme rather than strict chronology, so I don't think the later placement is a problem. Now, Luke also does mention the woes to Bethsaida in Luke chapter 10, but he doesn't ever make the connection to the feeding of the 5,000. But we do know that Luke does supply the missing location. But what we do see, and this is what I think is really interesting, and I haven't seen a lot of people talk about this. This is an example I found. I've never even heard Lydia talk about this. I ran a pastor, and she's like, "Oh, that's cool," but I've never seen her like share it. But Jesus heals a blind man in Bethsaida. And so it says in 8:22 in Mark's gospel, which most scholars agree, this is the earliest gospel. When they came to Bethsaida, some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes, he laid hands on him. He asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see people that look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again. He opened his eyes. His sight was restored. He saw everything clearly. Then he was sent to his home. And he sent him to his home saying, "Do not even enter the village." So he's like, don't even go back to Bethsaida. So he takes him out of Bethsaida. And then he tells him, don't even go into Bethsaida. So Mark doesn't even mention the woes. He never mentions this woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida. That saying is only in, like, we could just say Q, the shared material between Matthew and Luke. Okay. But he doesn't mention it. Okay. But it does make sense why he refused to work another miracle in Bethsaida and didn't want the blind man to return. So Matthew and Luke, they mention the woes, but not the healing. And it would make sense if there was some sort of earlier miracle and the woes being pronounced for Jesus to then take this guy out of the town, refuse to work another miracle there, and then tell him to not even go back because of this town is like under judgment. Like he really meant the woes. And so again, Matthew and Luke say Bethsaida saw mighty works and remained unrepentant. Luke narrates the feeding of the 5,000 near Bethsaida. Mark records a later blind man being healed there well after the feeding of the 5,000. The accounts interlock without one way spelling out the whole connection. But like, to me, this is like, boom, perfect fit. This is, to me, a more stronger example of the feeding of the 5,000 account where there's undesigned coincidences. Undesigned coincidences.
Really?
Yeah.
No, but I don't see a very direct connection between the woes and the guy Jesus not telling the guy not to enter the village, because it could simply be a way, an expression of the messianic secret. He was meaning in the way that he constantly told people, do not tell this to people, do not talk to anybody.
Sure.
Just another way for the same thing. Could just be that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty decent pushback. I'll give you that. The thing is like it does explain it pretty well, because Jesus still does heal lots of people. Okay, he's still healing people constantly. He's not like just trying to keep his identity so secret that he just never heals anybody unless they're like, way out of the way or something like that. Like Bartimaeus is in Jericho or something like that, which Jericho's by Jerusalem, by the way. If he's really like so worried about actually, that kind of backfired on myself there. What I'm trying to say, that doesn't work. When he's healing somebody in Jericho, that's right by Jerusalem. You think that's going to, like, people are going to catch wind of that. And they're going to be like, wow, okay, like, that's kind of a big deal. This is a big thing. And so if it is the messianic secret, like, this isn't consistent of Mark, because now he's having Jesus heal a blind man, another blind man in Jericho, right by Jerusalem. Like, that's going to get pretty well known pretty quick, right? And so I don't think that this is, it could be, you could say messianic secret. I'm not saying like that doesn't have any credence, right? But I think if he already pronounced woes on this city, if he already worked mighty miracles, a feeding of a 5,000, like, that's not going to, messianic secret, like, that's going to get out, right? Like, it doesn't matter, like, that's coming out. If he already did that and he pronounces these woes because of their lack of response, then it makes complete and total sense why he drags the guy out of the village, refuses to heal him there. I mean, Jesus is even trying to heal people in his own hometown. So, like, again, doesn't really jive with messianic secret hypothesis too well. It makes sense if he's pronounced these woes, this judgment, to take the guy out and tell him to not even go back. That makes more sense to me than this is messianic secret, especially when I'm pulling examples of, like, Jesus, he did try to heal people in his own hometown in Nazareth. And it didn't say he didn't heal anybody. He just said he healed people from minor ailments. Like, he is healing, like I said, a blind man elsewhere in Jericho, which is a pretty larger area by Jerusalem. Like, I don't think he's too worried about it. In fact, that even dovetails with another undesigned coincidence, because Bartimaeus is healed in Jericho. So when, why would he ask, hey, Jesus, have mercy on me, have mercy on me, have mercy on me? Well, Jesus already heals a blind man in John chapter 9, a man who was born blind, in Jerusalem. So that news would have spread of that. And so he's thinking, like, oh, he's coming? Hey, son of David, have mercy on me, have mercy on me. Those two actually fit together. And so, anyways, it's just my thought there.
Sure. Fair enough. Yeah, I think that's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I've never heard that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to take more of your time, but just one last quick thing.
Yeah.
If you want to look at the video, I found a very funny one in the Avengers movie. It's just a bit of a joke, but it's trying to make the point that if you try to go and look for them, like dig for them, you will find them, right? If you try to go try to read the text looking for those, you're gonna end up finding them. Like,
well, the Avengers doesn't purport to be historical reportage, so we know when we know the genre of what the Avengers is for one thing. Yeah. Second of all, I don't think that you're going to find them on the same kind of level as what you.
You wanna know what there was? How you find the Avengers?
We're gonna watch the.
Okay. You'll have watch it later then. Okay. You will see it later. Okay, man.
All right. That's cool. Take care, man.
Take care. Okay, bye.
Bye. Oop. All right. Let's see. All right, Owen. Thanks so much for waiting. I appreciate your patience, sir.
Hey, yeah, no, it's okay. I saw that video you made on the Women in the Gospels thing that I brought up with you last time. It was a good video. I thought you solved the problems there very well. But I wanted to talk to you about Christology, actually.
Okay.
So I do think that, Jesus is divine in every way that the Father is, right? But my one thing, I guess, is that, how I come to that conclusion is through, the Gospel of John and potentially, like the book of Hebrews as well. And I'm not sure, like, how, say, the Synoptic Gospels or, like, the rest of the, like, Pauline epistles, like, I feel that those writings, you can take a very, not necessarily a very high Christology towards what they say about Jesus there, and it's only when, like, John and maybe Hebrews come in that then you can say Jesus is God. So essentially, John's one of the latest books of the New Testament written, so that, like, maybe you could say that there's kind of a development here, but I don't know if you would disagree with the idea that, like, the other gospels don't have like maybe they do have definitive statements on Jesus's divinity and whatnot, but I sort of wanted to get your opinion on that.
Am I muted? No, I can hear myself. Okay. I don't know, for some reason I sounded muted for a second. No, I would disagree with that pretty much premise entirely. So I think the earliest gospel, which most people would say is Mark, gives us an extremely high Christology. And so, I mean, I could just show you here. And so Mark 1, 2 through 3, this is just like kind of like the prologue. And it says, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I will send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight. And then, of course, John is preaching this. And then who comes after Jesus? He says, who comes after me is mightier than I. He's not worthy to strap, untie his sandals, and he baptizes with the Holy Spirit. Okay. This to me is like super high Christology. Number one, so he's quoting Malachi 3:1, and it says, behold, I send my messenger, he will prepare your way before me. And he also is quoting Isaiah 40 verses 3, where it says, a voice cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Okay. And so Malachi is saying, I'll send my messenger, he'll prepare the way before me. In the context, the speaker is Yahweh. The messenger prepares the way for God himself to come. The rest of the verse confirms it. The Lord whom you seek will suddenly come at his temple. And so Mark adapts the wording and he says, behold, I will send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way. So Mark applies the text to John, preparing the way for Jesus. So the way of Yahweh in Malachi becomes the way of Jesus. And then he does the same thing in Isaiah 43, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight a desert and a highway for our God. Again, the coming one is Yahweh. Mark applies this to John's ministry before Jesus, and he says, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight. So the coming of Yahweh in Isaiah is fulfilled in the coming of Jesus. Same thing that we saw with the way he talks about it in Malachi. And then he says, he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. Well, like, who sends the Holy Spirit, right? In Joel, the prophets, who he's probably alluding to, it's Yahweh, right? And it says, the Lord will pour out his spirit. I mean, that's just the heading, of course. It's not inspired, but it says it's the assumption from the text, right? It says here, we'll even back up. You shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, that I am the Lord your God, and there is no one else. My people will never be put again to shame. And it shall come to pass afterward that I, this is still the Lord speaking, will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your young men will see visions. Even on my male and female servants in those days, I will pour my spirit. And so, yeah, this is what John says Yahweh is going to do. He's going to pour out his spirit. That's that, or what Jesus is going to do. That's something that only Yahweh does.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. Maybe I should have made it clearer what
Okay.
like
I misunderstood. I
alternative.
apologize. Yeah.
Yeah, like okay, like what alternative Christological position that I would sort of be coming from if John and Hebrews didn't exist. So I'm sure that you're familiar with McClellan's divine image Christology, right?
Yeah, okay, and here's my problem with that divine image Christology is it can be so. I mean, and you saw this in his conversation with Sijuwadi. I haven't caught up on all of it. I haven't watched all of it, but he's basically having to tell him like, okay, well, yeah, like it's so. This is what I'm trying to say. I'm sorry if my thoughts are a little bit muddled. It's so stretchy that you could just be like, well, so and so is claiming to be God, but he's not really claiming to be God. He's just basically saying that I represent God. And it's like, it's so stretchy. It's so like whatever. Like I like it's unprovable. And that's my problem with it. Right. Like, so like, why prefer that over like the Orthodox view that has been held for thousands of years?
Right.
If your theory can cover, my data says this is the theory. And then you're like, oh yeah, well, he just meant it this way. It's just like, okay, but like, why? like I just, if he's saying here he is Yahweh, I would think a Jew who already has the whole, there's a whole two powers dynamic that's already going on. There's already this Old Testament precedent for multiple beings in the person of Yahweh. We see it with the Spirit. We see it with the angel of the Lord. We already see this precedence in earlier Jewish writing, to even the point where Rabbi Akiva is like, they're like, hey, Rabbi Akiva, like you need to cool it with this two powers stuff. It sounds too much like Christianity kind of thing. And I'm butchering the history of it a little bit. I know I am. And Than's probably, if he's still watching, he's like, no. But it's basically like, this was a view that was held even by Jews at the time. This is something that's already in the Old Testament. They already seem to be, I mean, I guess Dan could just slap that on well, that applies to the angel of the Lord too, or that applies to the Spirit too. It's like, when does this end? It's just like, why not just like say, you know what? These people interact together as persons. Because think about the baptism. He's saying that Jesus is Yahweh, but then the Spirit later descends on him like a dove, and the Father speaks to him. These are all Yahweh. And it's like, if we see this multi-personal thing already in the Old Testament, I guess, it's just like, I don't know. This theory drives me batty because it's just like, it's disprovable.
Yeah, so I guess I would sort of say I do agree with you to an extent, and that is one of the reasons why I don't hold to McClellan's divine image Christology, because of this two powers in heaven stuff that's within Second Temple Judaism. I watched a Stan's video on it that came out on Inspiring Philosophy recently. It was a very good video. And I think that does sort of, add credence to the idea that there is this very high Christology in the Gospels and the Synoptic Gospels. I guess I would just say that, the statements that we find in the Synoptic Gospels would be expected both on a very high Christology and on McClellan's divine image thing. And then I think that maybe the two powers thing in the background, as well as the later statements of John's gospel and maybe Hebrews as well, kind of push it over the edge. Like, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. But it's also like, it's the shocking nature. Even in Matthew's gospel, there's just like a shocking nature of Jesus's self-claims or the claims over and over, right? You see it when he forgives the man's sins, the paralytic. You see it when he's before Caiaphas and he says that he's the Son of Man and that he's coming on the clouds and all that other stuff. There's like a shock factor to it, to where it's like, to me, I don't know, like, I could be wrong about this and I'm just thinking out loud and I'll have to play with this thinking, but it's like, I think it's more offensive because Jesus could just say, well, wait, I'm just claiming God's authority. I'm not saying I'm really God. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like, there's an absence of that. It's not like they're just, if it's not really blasphemy, then why is he getting called a blasphemer? You know what I mean? If it's not really blasphemy, it's just divine image, and like he's just claiming this really high authority that could account for blasphemy to a certain extent, but I think it's more accountable on the charge that he's just saying, I'm one of the persons within the Godhead. Because that's an even stronger, more controversial and kind of enraging sort of take. Like then I would just say like, whoa, no, guys, I'm kidding. It's just like Moses, I'm like I was God to the Pharaoh, but I don't really mean that, because Moses wasn't really God. He was just God to Pharaoh because of the miracles that he was performing and the message that he was speaking to Pharaoh. It's really like more like that, guys. He could have just like, that could have been an out, and like that's not an out that's taken. So,
right, yeah. I do think that there is some sense in which you're correct. Like, yeah, the charges of blasphemy would probably be a little more expected on a very high model of Christology than on the divine image bearing thesis, and that's it, right?
Right.
But like you said, there is also the sense where Jesus claiming to be divine and the unique divine image of God, right? That could still very much be charged as blasphemy. And So I guess that just currently, my position is that you know, if all we had were the synoptics, that I think a very high Christology and like a divine image bearing Christology could maybe go either way, and it would lean towards a higher Christology. But I think that John, the Gospel of John, and Hebrews sort of push it over the edge, maybe. And I know that Than is I think planning to make a response to McClellan's book, Yahweh's Divine Images, soon, and maybe he'll touch on that a little bit there,
Yeah.
if he does. But
Yeah.
yeah, I guess that's my position right now. I do want to look a little more into it, but I think you have raised some good points, and I'll think about that a little more.
Well, and the other thing too is like, don't let critics throw shade at John and just be like, well, John has like the highest Christology and even like a pre-existence and all that other kind of thing. And so that means development. Okay. If Mark is saying this kind of thing, like, I don't see why pre-existence is like completely like out the window just because like John introduces it.
Right.
And John himself is a highly credible historical source. And I've done other videos where I go into details why John is a highly historical, credible source.
Of course, yeah.
And so it's kind of like, is John saying something like a little bit different? Maybe, sort of, barely, And so it's kind of like if John's not contradicting the earlier Gospels on Christology, there's just an appearance of higher Christology, but really, when you look at some of the other statements in the synoptics, it's not that much like wider of a gap.
Right.
And
yeah.
it's just like, and so like John's a good historical source. The gap isn't really that wide. What's the big deal? Might as well like not become a heretic. So yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Yeah.
I completely understand what you're saying. Yeah, and I do think that John is a credible document overall.
Yeah.
I've heard most of the arguments for his reliability and all that. So
Good.
like, yeah, I agree that just because his Christology seems a little higher, he's more clearer on the pre-existence thing, and predicating the divine identity to Jesus very clearly, right? That doesn't then follow that, oh well, high Christology is a later development, right?
No.
So yeah, I do think you're right. And yeah, this is something that I do want to dig deep on a little bit. This is sort of just like my surface level understanding of the whole thing. But yeah, I do really appreciate your thoughts and opinions on this. So yeah.
Yeah. Hey, well, thanks for coming up, Owen, and then thanks for the good question. And thanks for the previous good question. I got a video out of it, so
absolutely, yeah.
That's how that works, dude. You have no idea how many Logos notes I've entered since that, because I had my friend Jonathan McClatchy was like, "Hey, somebody threw that one at you before, and they stumped you on it," and I was like, "Dang it, they did." He's like, "Why don't you make more notes in Logos?" And I'm not kidding. I probably made like 150 notes. So I'm like,
oh wow.
I'm like, I am not gonna get thrown again. I mean, yeah, I was copying a lot of like my old blog posts or like snippets from books and just being like throwing it into Chat GPT and be like, please organize this for me. And then I'll look at it and I'm like, yeah, that works. I'm not just like trusting it blindly. But I'm like, I do not want to get caught flat-footed like that again, because that just is no good. So it helped me.
Yeah.
So appreciate that.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you for having me on, and I hope you have a good day, man.
Yeah, you too, Owen. Thanks.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah, anytime. Just preparation wise, Logos is amazing. The note system is amazing. You guys can kind of see what I got here. Again, you can kind of tell it's a little Chat GPT. I don't have any shame in the game, because these are from my own blog posts or like things that I'm getting from like the McGrews or Jonathan McClatchy or like books that I really trust. Of course, I look it over. I'm just asking it to give me a brief summary, and then I go in, I edit the notes and different things like that. But when you're doing historical apologetics, which is primarily what I do, history, there's a lot of facts, there's a lot of sources, there's a lot of things there, and you don't want to like forget, like like just now when I was talking to Modern Atheism, I realized I didn't have a note on 46 years, the example that I've used over and over and over again. And so, like, sure, it'd be one thing I could just say, hey, this is kind of when John talks about this 46 years, like that actually matches up with external Roman sources and what we know from Josephus. But it's kind of cooler when you can actually like click on a note and go, look, and here is the source where it talks about Herod in the 18th year of his reign, after the acts already mentioned, undertook a great work and started to rebuild the temple of God. And so, like, hey, there's the actual source. 46 years from 2019 BC is roughly brings us to 2720 AD, which fits exactly where Luke says that Jesus began his ministry in the 15th year of Tiberius, and that we actually know from Suetonius and Tacitus and Cassius Dio that Augustus died. Tiberius's placed Augustus's death and Tiberius' succession in 14 AD, and that he actually was co-regent for a little while, for a couple years. And so, like, it all fits. You got these Roman sources, and then you got Josephus, and then you got Luke, and you got John, and this all comes together. And it's way easier to explain it when you actually have like the sources in front of you that you can point out. So anyways, that was just my little side rant. I can only take 1 5-minute call, and then I do got to get ready for work. And so, Light, you've been waiting for a long time, brother. I appreciate your patience. I wish I had more time for you. I wish I had more time for you, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have one doubt. It was like regarding the existence of this particular group called the Ebionites. Okay, I have seen you covering it quite a lot, right? So Muslims, yeah, like you would point out how the Ebionites did not believe in the virgin birth. Let's say they would not believe in the virgin birth, hence that's a contradiction with Islam or something like that. But they would point out, no, there were certain groups of the Ebionites which did believe in the virgin birth, and there were certain groups which did not. So there were certain groups which kind of did align with Islam. So how like would we counter that? Like that was like one of my doubts.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Earlier, I actually did cover this in the stream with like the first guy. So, but I'll give you a quick recap. And so, no, it's an excellent question. You're right. Eusebius does say, and again, I was harping on how, hey, have your sources, right? And so it does say that they considered him a plain and common man, was justified only because of his superior virtue, and who was the fruit of the intercourse of a man with Mary. And then Eusebius goes on to say, like, some of them don't deny the virgin birth, right? Like he says some of them do, some of them don't. Okay, here's the problem. Epiphanius in his Panarion, and you can look this up. This is in, I think it's earlychurchwritings.com or something like that. Epiphanius says the Ebionites acknowledged Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, and Aaron, and Joshua the son of Nun as Moses' successor. Okay, so far so good. But it says after that, they acknowledge no more of the prophets. They anathematize David and Solomon and make fun of them. Similarly, they disregard Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, Elijah, and Elisha, for they pay no heed to them and blaspheme their prophecies. So Epiphanius, in again, the work is called Panarion, just look it up. He's saying that and he acknowledges the whole thing about some of them reject the virgin birth, some of them don't. They only use Matthew's gospel. They hate Paul, blah, blah, blah. But he says they don't like the prophets. They like some of the prophets. They like the early guys in the Pentateuch, but then they chuck David under the bus. They chuck Solomon under the bus. They make fun of them. So think about it. Like Muslims, they highly regard David. They highly regard Solomon. They get mad at us for saying, when we talk about Solomon becoming an idol worshiper and David, having his affair with Bathsheba and killing Uriah, like they're like, hey, no, prophets don't sin. These guys, the Ebionites, anathematize them. That ain't Islam. That ain't Islam. Not only that, they teach that Jesus was an archangel. They have an adoptionist Christology. And so they do accept him, his sonship. They do accept him as some kind of like an archangel type of figure. And they do think that he was crucified. So this is the worst possible historical fit. They especially the rejection of the prophets. And here's the ironic part. If they anathematize Daniel, who do the Dawa guys run to as their favorite prophecy for the rise of Islam and Muhammad right now? Daniel. Daniel chapter 2, right? And the Ebionites reject Daniel. So it's over. It doesn't work.
Okay, wait. Like, did all the Ebionites believe that he was an archangel, and did all of them reject the prophets and like anathematize them? Is it like all of them?
Well, this is what Epiphanius says, right? And so what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to cherry pick and just say, we have no source that proves what the Ebionites actually believed. We just know that, like, Eusebius says that some of them some didn't reject the virgin birth. And we're just going to assume that they believed in basically the same kind of core tenets that we would as Muslims before Muhammad. So that's just an assumption made with zero evidence. So what we can't just say, well, maybe there was some Ebionites. First of all, number one, Ebionites don't fit the dominant followers of Jesus that Surah 61:14 predicts and Surah 3:55 predicts. We're supposed to see a dominant following, right? We don't have that, right? We have the Ebionites, a group where Irenaeus talks about them, Origen mentions them, Eusebius mentions them, but the most details that we actually get about the Ebionites comes from Epiphanius, and he says this is what they believe. They made fun of the prophets. And so we have to have a reason to think, okay, what's a source that says some of them did accept the prophets, right? We don't have a source. We're saying we have the one source that we do have says explicitly they reject Daniel, they reject David, they reject Solomon. They literally make fun of them. They blaspheme them. They don't like Elijah and Elisha. It says that they blaspheme their prophecies. And so they don't have a source. Now they're just having to like speculate and pull something out of their butt. And that's not history. That's just like whatever. That doesn't even make sense. And then the other thing too is these guys will say that James was an Ebionite. But again, James and Eusebius, when he talks about he's about to be killed and martyred, he talks about seeing Jesus as like the Son of Man coming on the clouds. And again, if James was an Ebionite, why is he quoting a prophecy that Ebionites reject? And so we just have to go by the sources we do have, not speculate by sources that maybe might be, if possible. You know what I mean?
Yeah, also one thing I would like to point out, right, that Saint Epiphanius clearly mentions, I think, that some of them denied the virgin birth, some of them did not. If it was the case, right, that some of them existed which did not, right, like mock the prophets, he would mention it, but he clearly says generally that they deny all these prophets. He does not give any exception at all. So we can literally just assume that he means all, at least, like based on the primary evidence.
It sounds to me, based on the fact that they just accept Matthew as like their gospel, that they were kind of similar to like the Samaritans or even some of the Sadducees, where because it says that they were fine with, they acknowledge Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, and Aaron, and even Joshua. All of those people appear in the Torah, right? In the first 5 books of the Bible, right? In the Pentateuch. Pentateuch is probably the better way to put it. And so it seems to me like they reject, so they take the first 5 and they take a mutilated gospel of Matthew and they just like kind of calling it good. And so that's what it looks like. So yeah, again, they have to come up with a source that actually shows somebody who matches Surah 3:55, Surah 61:14. Ebionites, even if like they're not even dominant, regardless, they're a little sect that fizzled out, and only like they're acknowledged, but everything that is acknowledged about them is like very negative and very much rejecting things that even Islam would reject. So
yeah, also so you mentioned the dominant followers part. Like Muslims, they can just say that Muslims were the dominant followers, so Muslims eventually did become dominant, so the prophecy was kind of fulfilled.
Yeah,
Muslims are
that's
the true followers of Jesus.
That is what they try to do, but that's not what the text says. The text says that he says that he's talking to the apostles, or the disciples, and then he's also, God is talking to Jesus, and he says, until the day of resurrection, you're going to have this dominant following. And so it's not, you're going to have a dominant following, but there's going to be like this gap between 40 AD and 600 AD of basically nobody that you can't even point to, while all the while the people who claim to follow you are the biggest shirk committing group of heretics in the world, Like, that's not what the text says. The text says, Jesus, you're going to have this amazing dominant following. And like, you can't just say, okay, but there was a 500, 600 year pause on that until Islam. That's dumb. That's just rewriting the text. That's just bid'ah.
True.
You're innovating. Yeah. So
Also, one more thing, like they would point out that Basilidians, like, how do you pronounce it? I don't know. They denied the crucifixion.
well, Basilidians also were Gnostics, and so they thought they would think Allah is evil. Basilidians reject the crucifixion, but Basilidians also they're Gnostics, so they think Yahweh is evil. They think Jehovah is evil. They think Allah is evil because they think the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses, so he's evil. He's the creator, right? And so they can't say that because now you have to accept Gnosticism, who says that God is evil. And they're not going to do that. And also, they think Jesus is amazing. They think he's the guy. They think he is God. So that doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. So there's literally no answer to this dilemma. They have nothing.
Also, I think I also have heard that these people used to believe that Jesus is so high, he's so divine. That's why they denied the crucifixion. They could not believe that a divine being like Jesus could get crucified, and hence they used to have this belief. They did not have this belief that he was just a human being or anything like that at all.
Yeah. And so they didn't even think he was physical, like, because they thought physical was gross. You know, they kind of had some disgust towards that kind of idea, right? And so, like, it was a Gnostic worldview. So yeah, it doesn't work. So anyways, like, I appreciate you for waiting. I'm sorry I gotta cut it now, but I do gotta get ready to go to work.
Okay.
Great question.
Have a nice day.
Yeah, no problem.
Have a nice day.
Yep.
God bless.
Yeah, you too, man. All right. For anybody I didn't get to, I apologize so much. I have to go to work. And so I gotta eat and rest for a minute, and then I'm leaving to do my thing. But all good questions today. Really good stream. And so if you like this kind of stuff, please share it. Share it in your little Discord groups or whatever. I'm going to continue to try to do these twice a week. So just stay tuned, and thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.